Chapter 418. Everyone knew that the asteroid belt was dangerous. Plus, there were some magnetic field disturbances here that increased the difficulty of flight. Therefore, most people would slow down after entering the asteroid belt to ensure their safety. However, right now, the pursuit in the asteroid belt was incomparably crazy. Shattered asteroid fragments shot out in all directions like cannonballs, and the occasional shockwave would shatter and shatter everything within its area of effect. Many aircrafts were caught in the shockwave and destroyed indiscriminately. However, this did not cause the pursuers to stop or retreat. They kept on chasing after the space plane in front of them. Can we go any faster? Knight looked at the aircrafts that were chasing closely behind them on screen. It looked like they were really going all out. The hardest people to deal with in this world were lunatics who didn't care about their lives. No, we're still in the asteroid belt after all, and the magnetic field and disturbances around us are too troublesome. Add to that the spaceplane's size. This speed is already reaching its limit. If we increase our speed any further, we won't be able to guarantee our safety. If we crash into those asteroids, even if it's just a slight graze, the people behind us will seize the opportunity and destroy the spaceplane. C.I. Jincheng said solemnly. They were all anxious. They had obtained the vaccines for the 86 viruses, but it wasn't easy to leave this place safely. After all, that planet was in the asteroid belt. Even leaving was troublesome, and they couldn't enter warp speed under these circumstances. It really wasn't easy to shake off the pursuers behind them. Kongman was sweating profusely. Although Knight and Pride were currently assisting with piloting, his thoughts were highly focused right now in order to avoid wave after wave of increasingly concentrated shock waves and cannon fire, as well as the scattered fragments and asteroids in front of them. The enormous amount of calculation in his brain and the control of his hands had reached their limits. Although he was tired and exhausted, he couldn't switch out now. This wasn't the time. Any mistake would cause all of his previous efforts to go to waste. Sillin opened the detailed star map of the asteroid belt, looked at the distance between their current location and the edge of the asteroid belt, and then looked at the pursuers behind them. He turned around and said to C.I. Jincheng and the others, "If we don't consider avoiding the enemy's cannons and shockwaves and increase our speed by half, do you have the confidence to avoid the asteroids?" C.I. Jincheng thought for a moment. "Yes, we can," Knight answered without turning his head. Pride's reply was the same. "That's good." Sillin took off the thick protective suit and prepared to leave the control room. "Hey, where are you going?" Feng Haichao stopped Sillin and asked. "Create some trouble for those people behind us. We're almost at the edge now, but looking at the behavior of those people in the base, I reckon that there will be a large-scale explosion next. At that time, it'll be difficult to avoid it. Cause trouble? Right now, those fellows are rushing over here as if they're not afraid of death, and there are so many of them." As he spoke, Feng Haichao suddenly paused and looked at Sillin in shock. "Don't tell me you're going to go out alone to cover their retreat?" Sillin looked at his idiotic expression and replied, "I'm not that noble." With that, Sillin walked out. "Hey, Sillin, are you confident? Do you need help?" Long called out. Sillin did not turn around. He made a don't worry gesture. "What is that guy planning to do?" The other people in the control room asked. "I don't know, Cheto. Do you know what that kid Sillin is planning to do?" Long looked at Cheto. Cheto looked up and calmly swept his gaze across the people around him. Then, he took out a book and fell silent. "Everyone." Sillin walked toward the exit. By the time he got close to the exit, his body was already covered in armor. "Turn off the protective shield," Sillin said into the communicator. After the aircraft's protective shield was turned off, the hatch opened. Sillin flipped over and held onto the aircraft's outer shell tightly to prevent himself from being thrown out. The exit was above the aircraft at a 45-degree angle. Right now, Sillin was stuck to this inclined surface. "Hey, Sillin, are you okay? Do you want to slow down?" Knight asked from the communicator. "No need. Just stay in your previous state." Sillin stuck close to the aircraft's outer shell and slowly flipped over to face the pursuers behind him. With a shake of his hand, a cannon appeared in his hand. Some of the asteroid fragments created by the shockwave bomb had hit the aircraft surface. Since the protective shield had been turned off, a couple of holes had been created. A fist-sized fragment smashed half a meter away from Scylla. Looking at the crater it created, if it had hit a person, even if they were wearing protective clothing or armor, they would at best be left half dead. The shockwave wouldn't stop, and the aircraft couldn't lock onto its target, even if it was fast enough. This was also why the people on the aircraft didn't bother to shoot. Scylla held the cannon in his hand and searched for the best spot to use it. The aircraft traversing through the asteroid belt would sway slightly from time to time due to the debris caused by the shockwave. Its surface was already full of holes. Fortunately, the aircraft's quality was reliable. So far, it was only a few superficial wounds. On the other hand, Scylla, who was holding the cannon barrel, did not seem to care about his surroundings at all. Even when the fragments collided with him a few times, or when he avoided an asteroid in front of him, Scylla did not seem to care about any of this. He did not even think about it. Right now, in his eyes, there were only the fighter aircrafts that were chasing after him and the asteroids that were randomly distributed around him. Now's the time. A white net that seemed to be weaved out of lightning spread out from here. There wasn't just one. 3 large nets were spread out from 3 different directions. After shooting, Scylla immediately entered the hatch. "I'll leave it to you guys." Scylla lay on the ground outside the hatch and said to the people in the control room on the other end of the communicator. Kongman and the others who were piloting the aircraft didn't have much energy to pay attention to what was happening right now. They only knew that there was a powerful force coming from behind, and it was very destructive. Lung and the others who weren't piloting the aircraft could clearly see that the white lightning weaved into a giant net, slicing the asteroids and the pursuing aircrafts into pieces. Every collision would result in an explosion of energy. When these energies were stacked together, it was like a huge bomb. The stacked and strengthened explosion spread out in all directions. The asteroids were blown to smithereens, and the aircrafts within the explosion range were no longer visible. They disappeared in the explosion and turned into cosmic dust. After Scylla entered the hatch, the aircraft's protective shield was activated again. The aircraft shook even more violently, but it didn't slow down. Pushed by the explosion, the aircraft's speed instantly increased. The people piloting the aircraft felt their adrenaline soar to the limit. It wasn't just the people piloting the aircraft. Even Lung and the others who were watching from the side felt suffocated by the tension. There were a couple of moments when the aircraft almost brushed past a couple of asteroids. They didn't even have the time to catch their breath before the almost collided situation happened again and again. Lying at the hatch entrance, Scylla didn't get up. Last time, his entire arm was almost crippled after firing a single shot, but now he had fired 3 shots in one go. His entire arm was numb, and his entire body was overwhelmed by intense exhaustion. Scylla decided that he might as well lie on the ground and rest for a bit. Even if Kongman, Knight, and the others were too busy, Cheto and the White Spirit were still helping them from the shadows. If even they couldn't hold on together, then they had no choice but to resign themselves to fate. Scylla closed his eyes and counted the time. The moment Scylla opened his eyes, the aircraft had exited the asteroid belt, entered warp speed, and left this place. It was only now that everyone began to breathe carefully. Their nerves were too tense just now, so much so that they couldn't even breathe properly. They could hear their own hearts pounding and their veins pressing against their blood, and they were still a little dazed. As for the people piloting the aircraft, just now, their arms were shaking. What the fuck? That scared the hell out of me. Knight lay on the chair and stopped looking at the control panel. After the aircraft entered warp speed and set up autopilot, Feng Haichao and the others came over to take over the control panel. Judging from the current situation, the people behind them hadn't caught up to them yet. Lung pinched his arm. Thank goodness I'm still alive. I didn't crash into those asteroids and end up as a decoration for the stars. Hey, Scylla, are you all right? It was only now that everyone had the chance to pay attention to Scylla. It was because Scylla hadn't entered the control room yet. I'm all right. Scylla had already taken off his armor and staggered inside. I'm going to rest for a bit. The box containing the vaccine had been stored away by C.I. Jincheng. Those instruments were also beginning to analyze the vaccine and create more vaccines based on it. Are you really all right? I'm fine. Sillin walked into his own lounge. Call me if there's anything urgent. Amen. Rest well. Right now, Knight and the others were tired as well. They really needed a break. After enduring the particle storm head-on and going through this stressful event, everyone needed rest and self-recovery. After Sillin entered the lounge, Hui Mao crawled out of Meng Shi Arrow's cloak and signaled Meng Shi Arrow to go to Sillin's lounge. Meng Shi Arrow didn't say anything and walked in the direction Hui Mao pointed. When they arrived at the entrance of Sillin's lounge, Hui Mao hopped off and asked Meng Shi Arrow to sit beside him for a while. It then entered Sillin's lounge by itself. Sillin sat by the bed instead of lying down to rest. It seemed to be waiting for Hui Mao. Hui Mao looked at Sillin and jumped onto the bed after making sure that Sillin wasn't heavily injured. Is that thing done? Sillin asked. Yes, it's done. Hui Mao opened his mouth and spat out a transparent liquid container that was 30 centimeters tall. There was an object the size of an egg in the transparent liquid container. It was moving as if it was going to come out. Sillin opened the can of liquid, and the thing inside came out and climbed up Sillin's outstretched palm. Sillin smiled as he looked at the thing in his hand. Is this thing really useful? It doesn't look like the nightmare taper. Isn't the nightmare taper very small? This thing is too big, Hui Mao commented on the thing that crawled out of the liquid container. The reason Whis didn't participate in the operation this time was because Sillin had given it a mission. Certain conditions were needed for the thing inside the liquid tank to grow, but those conditions were too harsh. In fact, a single violent shake might cause the thing to stop growing. Therefore, Sillin had given the liquid tank to Whis. Therefore, the gray cat began its incubating life for a period of time. It nested peacefully inside Menji Arrow's cloak and slept. Fortunately, the thing grew very fast. It grew from a tiny grain that was barely visible to the naked eye to its current size in such a short time. Sillin took a good look at the thing in his hand, quietly. In terms of size, there was indeed a huge difference between it and the nightmare taper. However, it looked 80% similar to the nightmare taper in terms of appearance. Moreover, its genes were more than 99% similar. After all, it was the nightmare taper that was born from it. Yes, the thing in Sillin's hand was all sorts of genetic information that Sillin decoded based on Kumanidin's records. After connecting it with the information that he obtained today, it was the ancestor of the man-made nightmare taper. In other words, it was the so-called primordial before it was modified by the virus. This primordial body could help Sillin locate the dream taper. No matter if it was the dream taper's mother, the dream taper's offspring, or even the dream tapers that had been split into a few generations, it could sense them as long as they were within a certain range. Sillin named this primordial emperor. The primordial being called Emperor stayed in Sillin's hand for a while. Then, it followed Sillin's order and burrowed into Sillin's palm. The protruding skin gradually subsided, and it was impossible to tell that a thing the size of an egg had just entered his palm. Due to the nightmare taper's tiny size, it was difficult to catch them. According to the information that they had gathered earlier, it took them a lot of effort to catch the nightmare taper that had split from its offspring. He could only control the virus after he had the nightmare taper under control. If the virus didn't work, then he could only rely on the nightmare taper. While Sillin was thinking, he noticed that Hui Mao had suddenly quietened down beside him. He looked over and saw that the cat was propping up its ears. The fur on its ears was trembling, and it was obviously eavesdropping on something. Moreover, it looked more and more impatient with disdain and contempt. It was probably something bad. As expected, it didn't take long before C.I. Jinsheng contacted Sillin to discuss some matters with him. Everyone was gathered in the control room. Just now, C.I. Jinsheng had told them the new news he had received. Communication had become much smoother after they left the asteroid belt, and they were in a hurry to contact the army they were in for support. Knight, Pride, and the others had their own channels of understanding as well. They didn't need C.I. Jinsheng's additional explanation. According to the news C.I. Jinsheng had just received, his father had asked him to hurry to Sector J's planet, J, C-335. Something had happened there. It was said that Senior Senator Basor had been infected with more than one virus there. C.I. Jincheng wasn't the only one. Knight and Pride had also received the same order when they contacted their fathers. The main reason they were worried about Basor was because they wanted to obtain Basor support. This was because Basor had always been a famous neutral party in the League of Stars' political scene. If they could obtain Basor's support at a time like this and make him owe them a favor, they believed that they would be able to obtain Basor's vote in the future. The army never separated from politics. Although it looked like the 8 corps were the ones causing the most trouble right now, the few big families in the political scene were secretly making big moves as well. It was just that they were keeping a lower profile compared to the army. The power and ability in their hands couldn't be ignored, and the more support they received in the division of power in the future, the higher their chances of success would be. They finally had an opportunity like Basor, and it just so happened that C.I. Jincheng and the others had obtained another set of vaccines at this time. Not only that, on the day before they contacted their families, a research team had obtained 62 types of vaccines while they were researching the descendant nightmare taper that they had captured after much difficulty. Although there were a few overlaps with the vaccine C.I. Jincheng and the others obtained, this was undoubtedly a great chance and a great hope. Double insurance. Knight, C.I. Jincheng, Pride, and the others were in an alliance with each other. Therefore, if they could obtain Basor's support at this time, their alliance would undoubtedly become even stronger. Right now, the vaccine they obtained had sent the analyzed information to all parties, and they could synthesize the vaccines based on this information. The cure and prevention operation had begun, and just like the politicians were clamoring for, the counterattack against the nightmare taper had begun. After that, they would have to rely on their own abilities to get support. There were still a few other important suspected bases on the star map they obtained from Monquiero, but C.I. Jincheng and the others had already contacted their own army. Naturally, there would be people taking action. What they needed to do now was to use this set of vaccines to save Basor and hope that the virus Basor was infected with would be within the range of the vaccine's effects. Someone from planet J, C-335, has arrived to receive us. After all, the equipment on the space plane isn't complete and the analysis information is limited. If we want to understand the virus better, we'll have to start with this set of vaccines for more detailed information. The person receiving us will take a part of this vaccine for analysis and research, and the other part will be used for rescue. Of course, the first person to be rescued is that old man Basor, said Knight. He was also explaining to everyone the reason behind their actions. To be honest, Knight did not have a good impression of Basor at all. In the political scene, people like Basor were either conservatives or cowards, if they were to put it nicely. He had never participated in the competition of those big interest groups, and he even abstained during the voting on the miracle. He abstained 20 years ago, and he abstained again this time. Knight felt like he had swallowed a fly in his heart when he realized that he had to save a person like this first to obtain the vaccines he had gone to great lengths to obtain. Sector J? That place seems to be a heavily infected zone right now. Lung frowned and drummed his fingers on the table. He didn't look as sloppy as he usually did, and he looked a little quiet. Right now, almost all of the trade zones are heavily infected zones. However, the ones infected are basically the civilians. Those with some power have armed their own territories and guarded them with 3 layers of defense. Kongman's eyelids were drooping, and his voice was low and emotionless. However, his words sounded very resentful. Even if everyone was unwilling, Basor's priority in assigning positions to the committee as a senior senator was enough to move everyone's hearts. It was no wonder that C.I. Jincheng and his family had asked them to hurry over and rescue him, afraid that someone else would beat them to it. Sillin sat on his seat and listened to their conversation. He rubbed his palm and said, "Then let's go." Chapter 419, Planet J. C-335 wasn't a very important planet in Sector J. It was just that it played a much bigger role in this incident, and the reason for that was Senior Senator Basor. This was Basor's home planet. It was also the second planet in Sector J to be heavily infected other than the transit planet during the Nightmare Taper incident. Basor had been dealing with some personal matters when the planet was heavily infected. After the Nightmare Taper disaster broke out, Basor ordered his subordinates to seal off the planet. It didn't take long before Basor was diagnosed with the nightmare taper virus, and it wasn't just one type. When Scylla and the others arrived, they could already see the unusual state of alert the planet was in from afar. The spaceport was heavily guarded, and there were a couple of patrol fleets around to prevent outsiders from infecting the planet. They also strictly forbade internal personnel from leaving the planet. After all, this was a heavily infected planet. Right now, the planet was in a sealed state. The energy shields that rose from the planet looked like the blisters on a patient's body, and it gave off a strange, morbid feeling. Although they were escorted by Senator Basor's subordinates and received by the army, they still had to pay attention to the fact that no one else was trying to play dirty tricks at this time. Right now, the 8 great armies were divided into 2 alliances. The 3rd Army, which Fiegler was in, the 4th Army, which the G family controlled, the 7th Army, which the CI family controlled, and the 1st Army, which was under Marshal Daniel's command. This was an alliance of forces, and Old Mo's son, Mo Ching, was in the CI family's 7th Army. The other alliance was led by the U family's 2nd Army, and was made up of the 5th Army, the 6th Army, and the 8th Army. These 2 factions had an alliance like this before and after the League of Stars' Chaos. It was just that it wasn't obvious in the past, but it was brought to the surface after the League of Stars' Chaos. What CI Jinsheng meant by this was to prevent the other group from interfering and causing trouble at this time. Those people might not do anything to Basor, but CI Jinsheng and the others who were ordered by his parents to treat and negotiate would soon become their targets. The spaceport landed. Their spaceport was not allowed to enter the planet, and there were already people from the 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 7th Army stationed at the spaceport to receive them. Scylla looked at the situation. The people sent were all trusted people who were familiar with CI Jinsheng and the others. For example, Ji Feihong from the Ji family. Pride was immediately beaten to the ground by Ji Feihong the moment he got off the spaceport. Since Pride had left home without permission and successfully made the elders go crazy with anxiety, Ji Feihong had beaten Pride to the ground like a chicken. Knight was in a similar situation. He was beaten into a pig's head by his cousin, Fiegler Holando. CI Jinsheng was slightly better off. He was only given a couple of verbal warnings, but of course he wouldn't let it slide just like that. He only delayed his punishment until he was done negotiating with Basor, and then he would be dragged back to the CI family to face the wall. As for Yu Lu and Feng Haichao, they didn't even dare to let out a fart in front of the officers and their superiors. After teaching Knight a lesson, Holando swept a glance at them. They were all very obedient. Didn't they see how badly Knight was beaten? Long Yuze sat at the side. The people who came were all military personnel and political figures, but none of them could control young Master Long. They were the only ones who were more relaxed here. Long patted Alan and pointed at the people who were being scolded. Note them down and report them when the time comes. We'll let everyone see the fate of heroes. Didn't your grandpa Fox tell you to go back? Scylla turned his head and asked. Long curled his lips. I didn't turn on my communicator. Scylla, sitting at the side, Scylla, Cheto, Minglio, Long and Alan watched the people not far away get scolded. Compared to the people over there, they were a lot more relaxed. They could take a breather, have some tea and snacks, and they didn't have to worry about viruses. After all, this was a military spaceport with multiple layers of defense. There were detection devices both inside and outside the spaceport. Since Holandu and Ji Feihong had been dispatched here, there was nothing for Knight and Pride to do. The negotiations could be left to Holandu and the others, who were more important to handle. Since the project team in the military had successfully prepared 62 types of virus vaccines, a couple more good news came out one after another. The number of vaccines was gradually increasing, and many places were already starting to carry out treatment. After the tension of the nightmare taper incident, everyone felt that it was time to catch their breath. However, Scylla couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Right now, the project team that caught a descendant nightmare taper had become the focus of everyone's attention. Moreover, the people of the 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 7th Armies treated this project team like a treasure. Not only did this project team give them hope of solving the Nightmare Taper incident, it also raised the reputation of this joint organization to unprecedented heights. The diplomats of the four legions walked out with their backs straight and their words full of vigor. Sillin had asked C.I. Jincheng about the person in charge of the project team and the members of the entire project team, but C.I. Jincheng himself did not know just who was in the team. This was because the project team had undergone a personnel change not too long ago, and it was no longer the original team that C.I. Jincheng knew. Night and Pride didn't know the reason behind this change either. Judging from Holando and Ji Feihong's appearance, they didn't seem to be worried about the Nightmare Taper incident at all. If they were this confident, Sillin had no choice but to think about the main person in charge of the project team. As far as he knew, although the few heavyweights of the original project team were influential in the League of Stars and had appeared in the two top magazines, Glory and Code, Sillin didn't believe that they could create almost 100 types of virus vaccines in such a short time. It wasn't that Sillin was looking down on them. Sillin just felt that after the personnel change, the main person in charge of the project team would definitely not be the same as before. However, other than those famous masters, who else could have such a powerful ability? "Hey, Sillin, are you coming with us?" Knight shouted from the other side. Holando, who was talking to Besor's men in front, frowned. He glanced at Ji Feihong and saw that he didn't say anything. C.I. Jincheng and the others also wanted to move together. No one was willing to stay here alone, so they didn't object to Sillin Helong and the others coming with them. This wasn't their territory anyway, so they might as well bring them along. They wouldn't feel at ease leaving these people here. Before leaving the spaceport and heading towards the planet, Sillin looked at the communicator in his hand. There were 2 messages on it. "What's wrong?" Lung asked when he saw that Sillin had stopped. "It's about the 11 squad." After replying to the message, Sillin led Chedo and the others onto the spaceplane heading towards the planet. This spaceplane was specially arranged by Besor. Holando, Ji Feihong, and some of their people, as well as Sillin and the others, were all sitting inside. There were battles going on in many places on the planet. Those who were sick to the point that they couldn't control their emotions due to the virus were all on the killing list. Before the vaccine was obtained, the so-called solution to the problem was to kill them directly. Right now, Besor's men were busy cleaning up the planet. Guards in combat uniforms and medical personnel in white protective suits were running all over the place. This kind of situation could be seen in many places on the planet. A portion of the vaccine had been sent out for evaluation, and the remaining portion was used as a cure for the disease. The medical equipment was already producing more vaccines based on this vaccine. After all, there was a limit to how many of these vaccines there were. Sillin had already sent all kinds of information about the vaccines to Vanguard, the Freedom Army, and the people at Sector S. The information about the 86 vaccines was no longer a secret in the first place. Anyone with some means and some effort would learn about it sooner or later. It wouldn't be long before they got their hands on the remaining vaccines developed by the military. The biggest energy shield on the planet was located in the central city of the planet. It was also the seat of the planetary government, and it was where Besor was resting. The energy shield was divided into several layers. After the spaceplane entered the first energy shield, it would be scanned for viruses. Every person who got off the spaceplane had to undergo a strict inspection to ensure that they weren't carrying any fatal viruses. It was only after several layers of inspection that they were allowed to enter the central city. Right now, the city had already experienced the initial chaos caused by the spread of the virus. It had been cleaned up by Besor's guards and the planetary government. It could be said that other than Besor and a few core officials, no one else in the central city had been infected by the virus. It was because those who were infected had been executed a long time ago. There were surveillance devices and virus scanning equipment everywhere in the city. Although it was understandable, no one would be in a good mood after being scanned by those scanners again and again. It was as if they had no privacy at all, especially those who came from the military. Especially those who came from the army. They were used to being nervous and resisted the urge to avoid it. "Fuck," Knight cursed after he was scanned by the scanners flying around in the air once more. All right, just bear with it. Hulanduo slapped Knight across the face and motioned for him to shut up. Although he himself was very annoyed by those scanners, there was nothing he could do about it. Every heavily infected planet would see these machines. When they scanned and discovered an infected person, they would sound a warning and start killing them. This was the situation in the past. Now, the infected person would be sent to a treatment site first. If the infected person was within the range of the vaccine's effectiveness, then they could be injected. If the infected person wasn't within the range of the vaccine's effectiveness, they could choose to receive other treatments first. After all, new vaccines were produced one after another, and the infected person would have a chance to recover by the day. If the infected person really couldn't hold on and lost control of their emotions, or their illness was too severe to control, they would be thrown into the treatment station and dealt with. A squad of guards came over. Every one of them was wearing a combat uniform from head to toe. Sillin had seen this kind of attire in other places on the planet before. Sillin and the others were also wearing protective suits, including Cheto and Monquiero, who were requested by Sillin. However, the protective suits were obviously different from what the people in this city wore. Many people looked at them curiously when they entered the city. I feel like I'm in a zoo. I feel like I'm a monkey, Lung muttered at the side. Sillin didn't comment on this. Right now, his attention was attracted by something else. The Emperor in his palm was moving. It wanted to come out, but Sillin suppressed it forcefully. He didn't want to cause any trouble at this time. The only thing that could make the Emperor move was the Nightmare Taper. Judging from the Emperor's reaction, the Nightmare Taper should be within the city's boundaries. However, it was impossible for the Nightmare Taper to appear when there were so many scanners and all kinds of mechanical defenses in this city. Otherwise, the scanners' alarms would have gone off a long time ago. The people who were waiting for them inside the city led them to a place to rest. After all, they weren't going to meet Councilman Bisor all at once. A representative was enough. All right, Knight and the rest of you stay here for now. We're going to meet Councilman Bisor. Behave yourselves. Hulanduo glanced at everyone while saying this. After everyone gave their word, Hulanduo carried the vaccine set and went to talk to Bisor with Ji Fei Hong and the other high-ranking officers. The vaccine was one of the reasons. The other reason was that they needed to talk further in order to obtain Bisor's support. The negotiation couldn't be concluded in a short period of time. Hulanduo was worried about Knight and the others, so he reminded them several times before leaving. Knight and the others finally relaxed after Hulanduo and the other high-ranking officers left. Motherf asterisk Kerr, that was brutal. Knight rubbed his face through the protective suit. His face was swollen from a beating. Pride didn't say anything, but he didn't look like he was feeling any better than Knight. He was beaten quite heavily. Can we take off the protective suit? It's uncomfortable to wear it. Lung moved his arms. It didn't feel good to be restrained by the protective suit. Just wear it. Who knows when a Nightmare Taper will jump in? There are only 100 or so vaccines, and more than half of them are unknown. If you get infected, you'll have to be locked up for treatment for a longer period of time. It's not worth it, C.I. Jin Cheng advised. As they were talking, Hui Mao, who was hiding in Sillin's backpack, rushed out and ran outside. Meow, your grandpa is going to look for food. C.I. Jin Cheng and the others wanted to stop him, but Hui Mao disappeared before they could even make in time. Sillin, don't let Weez get out. This isn't our territory. It won't be easy to handle if there's a conflict. C.I. Jin Cheng said. The people outside are cleaning up. I don't see a single pet on the streets. They've probably been hunted and killed. Sillin, call Weez back. Knight also suggested. Amen, I'll go ring that cat back. Sillin stood up and walked outside. I'll go with you. I'll go too. Knight and C.I. Jin Cheng both stood up and followed. Sillin wasn't from the military, so it would be easier if they followed him. Even if he didn't want to give them face, he should at least give face to the two armies behind them, right? After Knight and C.I. Jin Cheng caught up, Lung and Pride followed as well. The others who wanted to follow were stopped by the people who Landuo left behind. They couldn't stop the first few, but they could still stop Yulu and the others. After all, their ranks weren't high. Before the officer who Landuo left behind to guard the gate could persuade Knight and the others to go in and sit obediently, they heard gunshots coming from outside. Sillin pushed the officer in front of him away and rushed out. The others followed behind him. Just like what Knight and the others said, the guards' first reaction when they saw a cat was to kill it. Because of the nightmare taper, all the pets in this city had been hunted and killed. There wasn't even a mouse or a fly left. However, how could Huimao be captured so easily? The guards who went after Huimao failed to capture Huimao. Instead, they injured a few of their own people. Also, before the guards could say anything to the few people who came out, Sillin rushed up and beat up the few people who were holding guns at the front. Now, the scene was explosive. Sillin didn't hold back when he started beating people up. One punch after another knocked them to the ground. Not only that, he was shouting as he beat them up, "How dare you shoot my cat? I'll beat all of you to death." Meanwhile, Huimao, who was next to him, seemed to have received encouragement. He got even cockier and showed no signs of stopping at all. The officer who was walking out quickly felt a headache coming on as he watched the scene. At that moment, people around them noticed what was going on. Another 2 teams of guards rushed over. However, since it was not because of the virus, the detection machines flying in the sky did not react. Knight and the others saw the 2 teams of guards rushing over. These people were about to raise their guns, so Knight joined the fight without hesitation. It was one thing for them to use their fists, but how dare they raise their guns? Meanwhile, Huimao darted between these people. They did not even manage to touch its fur. The face of the high-ranking officer who had been left behind by Holando turned green behind his mask. He shouted loudly for both sides to stop, but the situation only became more and more intense. Left with no choice, the officer called over his men and pulled the 2 sides apart. He then negotiated with the captain of the other side's guard for a long time, apologizing and making promises. Only then did the conflict calm down. After things calmed down, Huimao nestled in Sillin's arms obediently. It did not have any self-awareness that it had done something bad. It licked its paws leisurely and did not look at the officer who looked like he wanted to pull out his gun and shoot it. "Let's go in. I'll leave this to Colonel Max," Knight called out to Sillin. He waved his arm and walked into the room. Max, the officer who had been left behind by Hulandu to watch over these little devils, had a gloomy face. He patiently negotiated with the captain of the guards on the other side and discussed the issue of compensation. After all, quite a few members of the 3 guards on the other side had been injured. A few of them were more seriously injured and were dragged back for treatment. However, their lives should not be in danger. While negotiating with the other party, Max was still thinking that the cat was really powerful. It could even tear through the other party's protective suit. It scratched so hard that it bled. While walking into the room, C.I. Jincheng was still thinking about how Sillin had been a bit impulsive just now. He charged up and beat up the other party without even asking anything. Also, everyone knew about Huimao's abilities. Those people could not get on it at all. So why did Sillin have to attack at this critical moment in the negotiation? Also, wasn't that cat's claws a little too heavy? Most of the people from the 3 teams who had come over were bleeding from Huimao's claws. Also, the strange thing was that Cheto and Monquiero did not attack this time. It seemed like they were not worried at all. There was nothing to be worried about. Was there? There was no way that cat would be caught so easily. C.I. Jincheng thought, but he felt that something was wrong. He was about to ask Sillin when the communicator in his hand rang. There was a message on it. C.I. Jincheng was not the only one. Knight, Pride, and the others' communicators also showed the same message. These people are from Miracle. Chapter 420. Everyone had formed a tacit understanding after joining C.I. Jincheng's taper extermination team for such a long time. Moreover, no one in this team was an idiot. They might look reckless and insensible, but they were actually better at pretending than anyone else. Sillin's behavior just now was nothing in the eyes of those who didn't know him. But to those who were familiar with Sillin, it was like going crazy. And when the word going crazy was applied to Sillin, it meant there was a problem. This was why C.I. Jincheng, Knight, and the others rushed forward to help Sillin. And now, they received their answer. Huimao obtained blood samples from the people who were scratched, and from the information obtained from these blood samples, Sillin knew that these people didn't come through normal means. These people's genes had been modified after birth. This kind of modification wasn't like the self-improvement and repair genetic medicine, but a miraculous implantation. Miraculous, people like to implant a lot of functional genes into some strong individuals, making them stronger, more well-rounded, and more destructive, even if this change would greatly shorten the individual's lifespan. All information could be obtained from the blood. The reason these people in the city wore thick protective clothing wasn't just to prevent viruses, it was also to prevent more information from being leaked. There were always some individuals who would give themselves away when they went berserk. Their faces and appearances would change abnormally when they were agitated. So protective clothing was a very good cover. C.I. Jinsheng and the others did not doubt Silen's conclusion. When they received this information from Silen, they quickly used their own methods to secretly pass this information to Halando, Ji Feihong, and the others who went to meet Councilman Basor. The people who were resting here all began to communicate with each other through various secret methods. It was because they weren't sure if there would be hidden surveillance equipment in this resting area. Colonel Max, I'm so sorry. Those people are really King bastards. Knight walked over and said to Colonel Max, who was giving off a dark aura. Max was a member of the Third Corps, so he was definitely trustworthy since Halando had asked him to stay. When Knight said this to him, he must have used a method that both of them knew to pass on the message. The real meaning was not through hand gestures, but other methods that outsiders wouldn't know. Silen didn't think that Knight would waste his breath at a time like this. Max also cooperated with Knight and said a lot of things after Knight's pleasantries. Therefore, Silen came to a conclusion. This was also a pretentious person. Hullen had left some people here, as well as in the spaceport. After all, this was Besor's territory, and he would definitely not allow a large number of people to enter. Silen and the others stayed here to rest. They didn't act immediately. They just used the fastest and most covert method to pass the message, so that they could prepare as soon as possible. There's a nightmare taper in this city. That was the second message that Silen sent them. However, since they found out that the guards were Miracle's men, it was no longer strange that the nightmare taper was here. They weren't sure if Besor was related to the people of Miracle. Perhaps someone from Miracle had infiltrated this place? No matter what the situation was, it was always good to be prepared. They would have to see the reaction of Halando and the others to determine what the situation was. If they fought Besor, they would definitely be on the opposite side. If that was the case, they might have to face the entire planet's guards. 2 minutes later, Knight received a message from Halando, retreat. This word alone confirmed Besor's position. They were on the opposite side. At the same time Knight told the others this news, there was an explosion at the Central Administration building where the negotiations were taking place. Retreat! Knight roared. In an instant, the seemingly peaceful situation suddenly exploded. The guards gathered here, and the people who were resting here began to fight back. They wanted to leave this place. It would be best if they could leave the city. They couldn't care less about Halando, and Halando didn't seem to want them to wait either. They split up. Knight, Pride, and the others dodged the enemy's attacks as they retreated out of the city. There were residents in the city who didn't know what was going on, but they were in the minority. These few residents would die in the indiscriminate attacks of the guards. These innocent people were left behind only to provide cover. At times like this, those who lived at the bottom were always the victims. The guardsmen were no longer as conservative as they were when they were fighting Silen and the others. Their pincers tore through the protective suits, and their entire bodies began to change. They looked very similar to those biochemical beasts, but these guardsmen were of a higher level. They possessed human intelligence and thought as their main focus, and they were able to control themselves. They were just like the excellent experimental subjects that Howley Hansen had chosen back then. These guards were no longer suppressed. Each leap they made covered a distance of more than 10 meters. They moved from the street to the end in the blink of an eye. Minji Aluo had thrown away the protective suit a long time ago. To him, this thing was a restraint, a complete restraint. He rarely used his hands. Most of the time, he only used his wings. However, in the face of these guards, he used his hands. His hands had sharp claws similar to Shusag's. They could easily pierce through an enemy's body. His entire arms were like steel. When they smashed into the guards, only cracking sounds could be heard. Minji Aluo couldn't control his strength, so he didn't use his hands often. However, he didn't need to worry about his strength when fighting these people. Sillin had said to fight with all his might. The scanning machines in the air displayed Sillin and the others' positions clearly. This was a reference for the other guards who were rushing over. The previous scan was not to see if the visitors carried the virus, but to remember the characteristics of these people, as if they were marking them. Bam! A scanning machine, flying in the air, fell to the ground like it was paralyzed. Bam, bam, bam. One after another, the scanning machines fell to the ground, never to rise again. All of their programs were in chaos in an instant. They didn't know how to react at all. They didn't know how to fly. They could only be pulled by gravity and smashed into the ground. This was Hue Mao's handiwork. They looked up at the sky. Through the transparent energy shield, they could see the ball of fire in the sky. It was quite eye-catching even in the bright daylight. The spaceport had exploded, and the battle had begun. The debris of the explosion entered the atmosphere, and the sparks from the friction rained down on the planet like a meteor shower. It seemed to raise the planet's temperature. However, no one was in the mood to watch this meteor shower. The air was filled with the smell of blood and death that was getting thicker and thicker. Max ordered his men to protect Knight and the others. Since Helando had entrusted them to him, Max would do his best to protect them even if he had to die here. However, Max didn't expect that they would have to deal with something other than the guards in the city. Outside the city was a wide moat. Based on Miracle's nature, she wouldn't put anything gentle in it. At this moment, a large number of strange creatures crawled out of the moat and quickly made their way over. Just as Max was about to order a change in direction, Sillin shouted, "Don't change direction. Go that way, cross the river." Max thought about it and agreed. Since it was a moat, the entire river almost surrounded the city. Where could they hide? It was better to just charge head-on. Before Max could finish his thought, Sillin added, "Don't shoot at those river beasts. Focus on dealing with the guards." Max choked. The next moment, Knight roared at him. "Do as he says." This way, not only would Max's men not deal with the river beasts that were rushing over, the guards would not deal with them either. This caused the river beasts to approach them even faster. The guard were hoping that the river beasts would stop these people and tear them apart. Max and the others were anxious. They didn't know whether they should fire at the river beasts or not. After all, the monsters were getting closer and closer. However, they soon realized that it didn't seem to be the case. Usually, the things in the river would help the guards deal with external enemies. But now, these ugly fellows were fighting against the guards in the city. They didn't even care about the few soldiers from the army who had fired at them at close range just now and charged straight at the guards. Their target was clear. The ones that crawled out of the river, big and small, ranging from the size of watermelons to 30 to 40 meters long, swung their long tentacles and opened their huge pincers with serrated teeth. They passed through the space between Max and the others and pounced at the guards. The ones with long legs leaped over their heads and headed straight for the guards. Max could clearly smell the muddy and aquatic odor of the river beasts around him, above him, and in all directions. The smell that he used to find incomparably disgusting was now more exciting than the perfume of the woman he had a crush on. Max didn't know what was going on. He only knew that he and the others had a way out. Sillin looked at Lung, and the latter made a done gesture. He could even tame those giant creatures in the sea, let alone these river beasts. Even if these river beasts were genetically modified, they were still river beasts. They retained their aquatic instincts and could respond to Lung's summons. Bang, bang, bang. Above their heads, a few misty spots appeared on the gigantic energy shield that enveloped the entire central city. Starting from these few spots, it was as if solid ice was melting. Multiple spots began to extend towards the surroundings and slowly melted away. In the sky outside the energy shield, 4 robots were flying. The blue stripes on their faces flickered. They activated the weapons on their bodies and attacked the energy shield. Looking at the sky, Sillin smiled. Scylla had received 2 messages earlier. The first one, "Captain, we're here too," from Yudi. The second one, "Let ice cream play. I won't show myself," from Hidden Wuxia. Chapter 4:21. The energy shield above Central City melted away layer by layer. This was no longer a sealed-off battlefield. The people in black armor stepped on hoverboards and flew over, covering the people by the moat as they evacuated out of the city. A large white ball fell from the sky and smashed into the middle of a group of guards, creating a pit. The guards who were hit never got up again. The white ball rolled around in the crowd and rolled towards Scylla. Black armor appeared on its body. Although it didn't completely cover it, it could protect some of the important parts. The bullets that hit the armor made clanking sounds, and the laser bullets did not cause much damage when they collided with the armor. When it got close to Scylla's location, the white ball leaped up and swiftly unfurled itself. 2 human figures came out of the white ball, and the unfurled white fatty was active around Scylla at a speed that did not match his body size. He slapped some of the guards who came close to him flat, and sometimes he would jump up and grab a fighter that was flying low in the sky and smash it to the ground by its wings. On its furry head, the semicircular ears were turning, alert for other dangerous situations in its surroundings. What a ferocious fatty! That was the collective thought of everyone who saw the scene. The 2 people who were protected by Snowball were wearing armor similar to Celine's, but they looked like children who had not yet reached adulthood. The petite figure who was moving around the fatty held a strange gun in her hand. It was quite similar to the one Celine used. Every time she fired, several guards would fall. As for the other small figure, he waved his long, sharp claws and fought against the guards, not falling into a disadvantageous position. Max was dumbfounded when he saw the newcomers. They weren't from his army, nor were they from the other 3 allied armies. Team 11. What? Max was busy firing his gun. The explosions around him came wave after wave. Even if he was talking into the communicator, he had to shout to be heard clearly. That was why he didn't hear what Knight said. He's from the 11th Vanguard, Scylla's teammate. Friendly forces, Knight explained again. Max didn't hear the first part of the sentence clearly, but he heard the last part clearly. The word ally sufficed. No matter what kind of person the other party was, it was fine as long as they were not enemies. The bridge that connected Central City to the outside had already been retracted, but the river beasts in the river had attached themselves to the surface of the river, forming a floating bridge for Max and the others to cross. Some of them had hoverboards or other flying aids, but they did not use them to fly to the other side. Relatively speaking, it was safer to maintain the current formation. There were planet guards everywhere in Central City. Max and the others had to leave the city first and wait for reinforcements. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to handle those people. Central City began to shake violently, and fortress-like buildings rose from the ground, toppling over the buildings and residential buildings that were originally there. Some people similar to the guards ran out from inside. Other than people, there were also fighter jets and tanks. This place used to be a military base. It was just that for many years, this military base had been hidden underground, concealing its ferocity. Now, it had revealed its true appearance. On the other side, Scylla looked at the sky outside the city. The huge battleship had entered the planet. Due to the fierce attacks, its landing was not stable. The landing point produced a huge shockwave, and rocks were smashed into the air. The landing of the battleship stirred up dust, causing the area to be covered in a haze. However, after the haze, armors emerged one after another. Artillery fire shot out from the haze, and the dust did not affect their shooting. In the sky, fighter jets rushed into the atmosphere and flew over. Bang, bang, bang. The bodies of the fighter jets flashed past. At this moment, the concentrated firepower fired from the fighter jets blew up the guards in the form of biochemical beasts who had not been able to dodge in time into a cloud of blood mist. The people who had followed Hulan Duo and the others to guard outside the planet had come to help. Hui Mao, who had been jumping up and down around Scylla, suddenly paused. His ears flicked, and he looked in a direction. In the sky over there, an object descended rapidly. This object directly stepped on a fighter jet of the guards in the air. It was a snow-white mechanical beast that was over 10 meters tall. It looked extremely awe-inspiring. What the F***CK? Why is that stinky rat here? Huimao stared. It was too arrogant. It had actually appeared on this kind of battlefield in this form. The surrounding tanks and fighter jets were simply like toys as it threw them up and down and stepped on them. Silin, I'm going to play. Huimao did not want to be left behind. He spread his limbs and charged in the opposite direction of the crowd's retreat. There were many guards, tanks, and so on that had come out from the fortress. Huimao, who was running, dodged the artillery attacks. In reality, with its speed, it was very difficult to lock onto it. Moreover, it was not difficult to avoid those attacks. Just as he was about to reach the other side, he leaped up. 2 fighter jets happened to be flying over, and the direction in which Huimao leaped was just enough to pass through the gap between the 2 fighter jets. As Huimao leaped up, he rapidly changed his form. The huge beast-shaped mechanical beast spun in the air. The long claws that he extended were like rotating fans, cutting the 2 fighter jets that passed by him into comb-like teeth. After passing through the 2 fighter jets, Huimao landed on a tank and flattened it. The next moment, he leaped 20 meters away and started stepping on another tank. These 2 cyborg beasts seemed to be in a competition to see who could step more. As they stepped on each other, they started to fight each other as if they were having a snowball fight. With a hook of their tails, they would coil up the passing tanks or fighter jets that were flying past them and throw them at the other party. Wherever they ran, they would casually grab a tank and throw it at the other party. To these 2 cyborg life forms, this battlefield was indeed more like an amusement park. Here, they could do as much damage as they wanted without being scolded or having to pay for it. Lung and the others, who had already crossed the river, looked at the 2 big fellows jumping around and wreaking havoc in the central city and joked. Those 2 fellows have been waiting for this moment for a long time, haven't they? Silin did not comment, but he was certain that Wuxia had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The middle-aged man was probably hiding in a corner somewhere, watching the 2 cyborgs play with each other. A group of soldiers in combat uniforms walked over and said a few words to Max before escorting them away. Silin called Tang Qiuqiu and the others over, and they left together. The people from the 11th Squad had entered the planet via spaceplane. The starship was outside, so it did not come in. It was because the warships and combat squads of the military had already entered the planet, and there were fighter jets and space planes everywhere. Yudi was afraid that he would become a target for both sides if he were to enter the planet. After all, the 11th Squad hadn't communicated with the military yet. The 11th Squad, who were providing air cover, also retreated after receiving Silin's notice and flew towards the spaceplane. After the military had entered the planet, they quickly occupied a place to serve as their base. The soldiers were supposed to escort Knight and the others to this base. Moreover, Kulan Duo and Ji Feihong were already waiting for them at the base. It would appear that the 134th, 134th, and 47th Legions weren't unprepared this time. They were fully prepared, or they wouldn't have brought such a well-equipped combat squad with them. The other reinforcements were probably on their way as well. Silin led the 11th Squad into the base. Since C.I., Jincheng, and Knight had informed them beforehand, the soldiers guarding outside the base didn't stop them. The 11th Squad spaceplane landed on the empty ground outside the base, and a few more fighter jets of the 11th Squad followed suit. Yudi, who was clad in armor, stepped out of the aircraft. Following behind Yudi was old Mo, who was clad in protective gear. Silin walked over quickly. "Why are you here too?" Silin relaxed when he saw that Mo Heng's complexion looked fine behind the transparent mask. Sir Mo was very dissatisfied with Silin's reply. "What? Are you the only one allowed to come? Am I not allowed to come as well?" "No." Mo Heng waved his hand and stopped Silin. "This old man has been through a lot of things like this when I was young. You don't have to worry about me." How could he not worry? Silin mumbled in his heart. This was a battlefield, but there was an unknown virus lurking behind it. One could get infected at any time. Moreover, the Emperor in Silin's palm was reacting more and more violently. This meant that there must be more than one nightmare taper around. At the same time, the detection machines were either destroyed or broken in such a situation. They could not be of any use at all. The protective suit wasn't omnipotent. Many people had torn protective suits, cracked masks, and puncture wounds. These were all people who could be easily infected. While Sillin and M.O. Hung were chatting, Max walked over quickly. Knight asked him to call Sillin over, but before he could speak, Max saw Sir Mo's face behind the transparent mask. Slap! A military salute. Hello, Elder M.O. M.O. Hung looked at Max, who was standing in front of him. Oh, I remember you. Lieutenant Max? No, Colonel. Max was confused. Why was Sir M.O. with the hunters from Vanguard? However, there was no time for Max to think about it. He passed Knight's message to Sillin and invited M.O. Hung over. Since they had bumped into each other, they could not let Sir M.O. stay here just like that. Sillin nodded. After informing Yudi and the rest, he and M.O. Hung arrived at a medium-sized aircraft that had landed in the center of the foothold under Max's lead. Knight and the rest were sitting in the aircraft. The atmosphere seemed a little heavy. Ji Fei Hong and Hu Landuo had suffered gunshot wounds. The gunshot wounds were not fatal, but they did not look well. When Celine arrived, Hu Landu was in the middle of a conversation. We're so well prepared this time, mainly because of one person's suggestion. We did all these preparations just in case. I didn't expect him to be right in the end. Although we thought the possibility of a war was slim before this, we've now proven our speculation. One person's suggestion? Who? Knight asked. Hu Landuo shook his head and said nothing. Cough, cough, cough. Hu Landuo spat a mouthful of blood as he coughed. Meanwhile, Ji Fei Hong, who had been resting with his eyes closed next to him, lifted his hand and touched his nose. He looked at his fingers, which were covered in sticky blood. The blood was increasing, and it seemed like it could not stop. Chapter 422. Hu Landuo and Ji Fei Hong's condition made the rest of them panic. There were no life-threatening injuries when they were being treated a few minutes ago. However, they looked rather serious now. It was too sudden. The paramedics ran over immediately and brought Ji Fei Hong and Hu Landuo into the emergency room in the aircraft. What's going on? Nat and the rest were walking around anxiously outside the emergency room. Perhaps he was too frustrated, but Nat felt even hotter and more irritated in the protective suit. He wanted to take it off, but Sillin stopped him. They might have been infected, Sillin said. Infected? But they're wearing protective suits. Nat stopped talking all of a sudden. He recalled the injuries on Hu Landuo and Ji Fei Hong. Their wounds had been exposed to the air for a long time since they had retreated from the administration building. They might have been infected. However, everyone had to go through the sterilization room before entering the aircraft. They could only enter after going through the virus detector to make sure that they were safe. However, they thought it would be troublesome to take off their protective suits and put them back on again. Therefore, they had been wearing them. If Hu Landuo and Ji Fei Hong were really infected with the virus, the detector would not be able to detect it. It must be a new, unknown virus. After all, theoretically, the mother nightmare taper would carry more viruses than its offspring. The summary of the viruses in the offspring nightmare tapers that they had captured was not complete. There was no vaccine or specific medicine for it. Moreover, Sillin suspected that the source of the infection was not here. Hu Landuo and the rest must have been infected when they were at the administration building. Apart from Hu Landuo and Ji Fei Hong, the people who had followed them to the administration building might have been infected as long as they were injured, had their protective suits torn, or had their breathing masks malfunctioning. A group of soldiers were discussing in a temporary emergency room at the edge of the foothold. Two people were fighting in front of them. One of them was from the army, while the other was Carrie, who had taken off his armor. It seemed like Carrie was getting along well with these people. They must have built up a friendship when they were protecting Sillin, Max, and the rest when they were evacuating the central city. These people were all battle maniacs. After treating their wounds and waiting for their mission, both parties would discuss and spar with each other during this time. The others watched from the side as they relaxed before the battle. As he was fighting, he suddenly heard a loud and imposing command. Line up. Whether it was those who were leaning against the wall, those who were sitting on the ground, or those who were fighting with Carrie, when they heard this order, All of them immediately fell in a line reflexively and stood in a proper military posture. The smiles on their faces were all wiped away, and they stood straight as a ramrod, looking straight ahead. However, after waiting for a long time, they didn't hear any follow-up orders, nor did they see the commanding officer. However, they didn't dare to look sideways, so they kept their eyes fixed on him. Carrie and Mogaz, who were watching from the sidelines, looked around in confusion. They didn't see anyone else. The medic and logistics staff looked around as well. After a while, they saw the big bird standing on a high shelf. One of the medics in charge of the emergency room laughed. "This prankster. Enough. Ghost Claw is messing with you." Standing on a high shelf, Ghost Claw pecked at the bird's feathers indifferently. He didn't seem to have done anything wrong at all. The people who were lined up immediately burst into an uproar. They joined forces to criticize Ghost Claw. However, before they could say anything, they heard a sharp alarm. Ghost Claw shut its mouth tightly, indicating that it wasn't the one who issued the alarm this time. This time it was for real. There was a result from the aircraft. The medical alarm was also coming from there. Just now, the medic who came out of Ulanda's emergency room reported the current situation with a serious expression. It was indeed a new type of virus. Moreover, it would be difficult to find a cure in a short period of time. After the diagnosis, everyone who had gone to the Central Administration Building with Ulanda was quarantined. However, before the quarantine was announced, they were already showing similar bleeding symptoms. Some were coughing up blood. Some are like Ji Feihong. Their corneas were congested, and blood kept flowing out of their nostrils and ears. They couldn't control it at all. To make matters worse, these people had already come into contact with other people in the foothold. Although most people here were wearing protective suits at all times, there were always people who were injured or whose protective suits were damaged. It was no wonder that Ulanda and Ji Feihong were able to escape from the Central Administration Building so quickly. The purpose of these people wasn't to kill Ulanda and the others, but to spread the virus. The people in the emergency room that Carrie and the others were in had never been to the Central Administration Building. However, some of them had come into contact with the people who had returned from the building. Many people in the emergency room were also infected. It was just that their symptoms appeared a little later. Carrie and the other people in the emergency room were sent to the quarantine room that the army had hurriedly built. Mogaz was guarding the room. He had been wearing his armor all this time to avoid infection. However, Carrie couldn't. Carrie's nose was already bleeding. Just like the other infected people, the blood wouldn't stop flowing. Mengjiero was in the 11th Team's aircraft. He wasn't used to interacting with people. He preferred a quiet place. A little fellow stood in front of Mengjiero. Because he wasn't used to wearing armor, Chiefing had put it away as soon as he returned to the aircraft. Chiefing looked at Mengjiero. His expression was just as serious as Mengjiero's, but the tail behind him betrayed his feelings and intentions. One look at the tail wagging happily, and it was obvious that Chiefing was just trying to get close to this new addition, who also had a beast-like appearance like him. However, Mengjiero's expression grew more and more serious. He just didn't know how to express his intentions. Suddenly, Chiefing stopped wagging his tail and looked down at his palm. There was blood dripping from his palm. Before Chiefing could wipe his nose, Mengjiero swept Chiefing up with his wings and went to find Yudi. Sillin had told him to look for Yudi when he wasn't around. Sillin walked out of the Legion's space plane and rushed toward the quarantine room. Carrie and Chiefing were lying in one of the isolation rooms. The armor Mogaz and Yudi were standing guard outside, while Mengjiero was sitting inside. Because he was the one who brought Chiefing here, and he wasn't wearing any protective gear, the medics in charge of this place wouldn't allow Mengjiero to run around like this. Tang Qiuqiu was standing at the door. She was strangely quiet. Because she was wearing armor, Tang Qiuqiu's expression couldn't be seen. Before Sillin entered, he patted Tang Qiuqiu's head. "Don't cry. I'm here." Chiefing was slightly more energetic than Carrie. When Sillin arrived, he was playing chess with Mengjiero while Carrie was writing his last words on an electronic tablet. Sillin took the tablet away from Carrie's hand and tossed it aside. "Last words, my ass. I'm here. What are you afraid of?" Carrie chuckled twice. Perhaps it was because he had lost too much blood, but his face was very pale. If he hadn't put away his armor, he wouldn't have been lying here, right? But there was no point in regretting now. Carrie didn't like to feel sorry for himself. Hang in there. I have a way. Silen's tone was firm. Carrie, who didn't have much hope at first, felt a little excited. Qifeng, on the other hand, was grinning so widely that his canine teeth were showing. The medicine they were using was very good. Silen also took out some of his personal collection and gave them to Qifeng, Carrie, and the Army's medical team. Now is not the time to hide anything. After checking on Carrie and Qifeng's condition, Silen left in a hurry. Before he left, he talked to Yudi and Cheto for a while and arranged everything here. CI Jinsheng and the medical team were busy developing a vaccine and medicine against this virus. He asked Silen to join the research team, but Silen refused. Silen had his own plans. This time, Silen's goal wasn't the virus, but the source of this virus. Based on the Emperor in his palm's reaction, Silen could conclude that the main nightmare taper was in the city center. It was very likely to be in the administrative building. The activated nightmare taper had complete antibodies against the hundreds of viruses it carried. Everything would be solved as long as the main body was found. Right now, inside the city center, the tall administrative building was surrounded by guards. Be it in the air or on the ground, they were everywhere. The army couldn't reach this place just yet. On the 100th floor of the administrative building, an old man was leaning on the windowsill with a walking stick and looking at the situation outside. He wasn't wearing a protective suit, and the window was open. He didn't have any intention of guarding against the virus. The wind carrying the heat of war blew the hair on the old man's temples, but it couldn't blow away the smile on the old man's face. The old man didn't seem to be in good health. He was wearing a respirator, and every breath he took was heavy and difficult. However, the old man didn't seem to notice it. He looked at the world under the tall building and the battlefield outside the moat with a smile on his face. He knew that the army came prepared this time, and he also knew that there would be more coming. The situation was not in his favor, but the old man just stood there with a calm smile on his face, as if he was enjoying the scenery. Soft footsteps were heard, and there was the sound of wheels rolling. Behind the old man, a young man pushed a wheelchair over. There was a person sitting in the wheelchair. Only half of the person's face looked like a normal person without any wrinkles. The other half of his face had a metallic luster like a robot. He was wearing loose clothes that covered his entire body. The old man standing by the windowsill didn't turn around when he saw the two outsiders. He was still looking out the window. "You're finally here," the old man standing by the windowsill said. He sounded like he was chatting with an old friend. "You look like you're in a good mood. You're still in the mood to enjoy the scenery," the person in the wheelchair replied in the same tone. The old man didn't explain. Instead, he said, "If we worked together, the outcome would have been different." The person in the wheelchair smiled. "We've been on different sides ever since you ordered Red to kill him." Chapter 423. There was basically no one alive on the ground floor of the Central Administration Building. There are not even many guards around. When Silen snuck in, he did not expect that there would be no one guarding the center. Was it intentional or was it a coincidence? Right now, Silen couldn't care less about those things. The Emperor in his palm was reacting more and more strongly, so Silen quickened his pace. Right now, Silen wasn't wearing his armor. In order to better sense and judge through the Emperor, Silen simply put away his armor. It wasn't hard for him to sneak into this place with his abilities. Originally, he was prepared to fight a hard battle after entering the administration building, but he didn't expect that there was nothing here. No, to be exact, all the trouble had been taken care of. He could also see some traces of battle left behind by Holando and the others when they left this place. Lying there were people in army uniforms, as well as people in security and administrative uniforms. These people were already dead, and the machines and electronic devices that seemed to be in good condition but were actually unusable had all lost their functions. All the electronic devices on the floors that he passed through were paralyzed. The elevators could not be used, and there was no light. It was pitch black where the windows and doors were closed. Hulan Du and the rest definitely could not have taken care of the machines and devices. If they had, Hulan Du and the rest would not have been in such a terrible state. Who else was here? Sillin sensed that there was more than one person there when he approached the 100th floor. He approached them quietly. The main nightmare taper was here. According to Sillin's plan, he would attack as soon as he found the main nightmare taper and extract the antibodies from it. However, the conversation inside soon attracted his attention. Since there was a door, Sillin could not see what was going on inside. However, the windows and everything else were open, so voices came out faintly. With Sillin's hearing, he could hear the conversation clearly. One of them sounded rather old. He could tell that this old man was in poor health from his voice, as if he was on his last breath. Meanwhile, he could not tell the other person's age or health condition from his voice. There was too little emotion in his voice. He was calm and cold. He should be such a person. However, who was the third person? Sillin could tell that there were 3 people inside, but it was basically only 2 of them talking. The third person was like a bystander, standing there without interrupting. Among the 3 of them, whether it was the old man who had difficulty breathing or the other 2, their tone and breathing were all rather calm. This was true calmness, not a pretense. What made Sillin restrain himself from making a move was the term Red Branch. After interacting with the Sheaf family for some time, Sillin knew that the Sheaf family had split into 3 branches 1,000 years ago. They were the red, blue, and white branches. Shimu belonged to the white branch and belonged to the conservative faction. He stayed in the League of Stars and maintained the lifestyle and habits of his previous branch. The blue branch gradually integrated into the League of Stars and might even infiltrate other forces. As for the red branch, they directly opened a path to the Mist Bodhisattva branch and Shikai's ancestors. But, Chao Hongji, this shouldn't be Shikai and the others, right? After all, how long had it been since Shikai joined the League of Stars? That was why Sillin decided to delay his operation in order to understand the reason behind this. Judging from the effect of the medicine he used at the temporary base, it should be able to buy him some time. This was more than enough time for Sillin to understand everything. Red Branch? The old man laughed disdainfully. It was just a few laughs, but the old man seemed to have exhausted a lot of energy. It took him a few minutes to recover. The real Red Branch is long gone. At most, they can only be regarded as defective goods, watchdogs. The people who stayed behind 1,000 years ago were abandoned by the real Red Branch. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hiding in the same old place as the White Branch. The old man mocked. It doesn't matter if they're staying here or if they've been abandoned. They're still part of the Red Branch. More than 50 years ago, you used Allalo's White Knight incident to start a war. You used the conflict between the military and the hunter group to make the remaining members of the Red Branch become cannon fodder, which goes against the Sheaf family's principles. Principles? I'm not a member of a Sheaf family. The Sheaf family's principles mean nothing to me. You're still the same, always deceiving yourself, the man in the wheelchair said coldly. Sillin hid in the dark and listened to their conversation. He thought of many things. For example, the battle 50 years ago. That battle sent Nada to prison and Komunidin to death. Since then, several major forces had kept a low profile. Back then, Sillin had suspected that White Knight alone couldn't have caused such a large-scale and far-reaching war. Based on Lung's analysis, Sillin knew that there was a mastermind behind this. In the battle 50 years ago, there weren't many people involved in politics. There were a lot of people involved in the military and the hunter regiments. Lung had said that he suspected the 3 old guys in the parliament had leaked the information on purpose. Now that he thought about it, one of the 3 senators who had pushed for the battle was this old man, the senior senator, Bisor. From an outsider's point of view, Bisor had always maintained a neutral stance. However, a lot of people might not have guessed that he was the true mastermind behind Miracle. Sillin had deduced many things from the conversation between the 2 men inside the room. The battle 50 years ago had caused all parties to lose a lot of men, and the aftermath of the battle had alerted all parties. Everyone had become more cautious, and the 4 great hunter regiments had toned down some of their sharpness. To show fairness, every force that had participated in the battle had sent someone to Sector S's high-security prison, including Andryra's men and Nada, who was the commander of the 3rd B Squadron at the time. It could be said that Nada was a sacrifice. He had shouldered all of Vanguard's crimes alone. After all, he was just a member of AB Squadron at the time, and the few important A Squadron members who had participated in the battle had been protected by G-Phone. At the time, Nada had never intended to participate in the battle at all. In the end, he was dragged into it, and Komunidin and the others who had fought with Nada were left behind. Sillin had chatted with Nada when he was in A Squadron, and he knew what kind of person Nada was. He was not the kind of person who would overestimate himself and ask for trouble. Moreover, some of the things that Sillin had discovered later on also showed that there were other reasons for the 3rd B Squadron's incident back then. Nada had shouldered the crime he was convicted of during the battle and was sent to prison. That was why he was promoted to the A Squadron immediately after he was released, and he was even one of the higher-ups. His son, Falvi, was also appointed as the commander of the 3rd B Squadron while Nada was in prison. This was the compensation G-Feng had given them. 50 years ago, when Nada was at the peak of his hunter career, when the 3rd B Squadron was at its most glorious, he was treated as a sacrifice and sent to prison. Although he might have reached an agreement with G-Feng, what about the others in the 3rd B Squadron? Right now, how many people in the 3rd B Squadron still remembered Komunidin? Did they remember the 3rd B Squadron that was once glorious in the Vanguard Division? Although Nada was compensated later on, as a hunter, he did not roam the galaxy during his prime. Instead, he was trapped in a narrow space for 50 long years. This was not compensation. Maybe Nada did not care, but Sillin was not that kind of person. In fact, Sillin had always been guarding against this kind of situation. If Sillin was in the same situation as Nada back then, G-Phone would have sacrificed Sillin without hesitation. So what if you were a person with potential and ability? There were plenty of people with potential and ability in this part of the galaxy. Another thing to note was that Miracle had officially risen to power at that time. Although Miracle had a bit of background and ability, it definitely could not compare to the scale and influence of Miracle later on. After the battle more than 50 years ago, Miracle took advantage of the time when all parties were recuperating. The company that should have been shut down a long time ago due to illegal research was taken over and supported by Basor in secret. The incident 50 years ago was a turning point. It could be said that Miracle developed the fastest during that period of time. They also received support from many parties, and many people secretly allied with them, including the Yu family and the deceased Heavenly Edict Emperor, Orlas. This made Miracle a hegemon among their peers. Aside from that, Sillin also heard the people inside talking about the White Branch. You used those people to wipe out the remaining members of the Red Branch, force the members of the White Branch to their deaths, and even caused internal strife in the Blue Branch. I know you hate the Shi clan, but you can't deny that the Shi clan's blood flows in your veins. You inherited your mother's eye color and inherited the Shi clan's innate talent. The man in the wheelchair said slowly and emotionlessly. It was almost as if he was talking about something that had nothing to do with him. The people who forced the White Branch to their deaths. Shimu's squad. Angenia had told Sillin a few things about Shimu before. 10 years ago, when the White Branch Shi family was ambushed, they offered 5 sets of armor in exchange for hiding Shimu with Angenia. Angenia promised to protect Shimu for 10 years. Angenia said that Shimu was not even 5 years old when the incident happened, but he knew everything. His mind was no less than an adult's. Not long after the Shi family was captured by the League of Stars government, the space laboratory where the White Branch Shi family was imprisoned exploded. None of the people inside survived. Shimu's hair turned white overnight when he heard this news. Shimu was very sad at the time. At the same time, Shimu should have known the truth. Otherwise, why would a child who wasn't even 5 years old worry so much that his hair turned white? He knew that the elders who were captured committed suicide and were forced to do so. However, Shimu had promised those elders that he wouldn't participate in that kind of war. It wasn't easy for him to survive, so he couldn't be dragged into it again. You knew that those people would rather die than carry out that kind of research. You knew that they would commit suicide. Everything was within your plan. 50 years ago, you eliminated the people of the Red Branch. 20 years ago, you instigated the internal division of the Blue Branch. 10 years ago, the people of the White Branch were forced to their deaths, as expected of someone with the blood of the Shi family. Smart and cold. Bisor, who was standing by the window, laughed silently. The wrinkles on his face deepened. I just didn't expect that you would survive and join Azrael. I really couldn't do anything about you joining Azrael. However, it was a blessing in disguise. This way, you can live a little longer. According to what you said, I should be thanking you. The man in the wheelchair looked at Bisor calmly. You should know that the Shi family never interferes with politics. This is the rule of our ancestors. The heavens blessed them with extraordinary talent, and every single person who interfered with politics died a horrible death. Bisor laughed. First of all, I still don't recognize myself as a member of the Shi family. Second, even if the Shi family didn't interfere with politics, they wouldn't have had a good ending. Did the people of the Red Branch interfere with politics? Didn't they end up as cannon fodder? Did the people of the White Branch interfere with politics? In the end, they were forced to commit suicide. In this world, principles are the most unreliable thing. Those who lose their lives for the sake of it are idiots. Take the people of the White Branch, for example. Or that woman. You should call her mother. Mother? She's just an obstacle. She always compares me to the Shi family. Unfortunately, our values are different. The Shi family are all idiots. You may have chosen the path of politics, but you can't change the Shi family's thirst for research. Otherwise, you wouldn't have taken over Miracle. As he spoke, the person in the wheelchair, who had been expressionless all this while, suddenly smiled. After listening for so long, can you come out now? Silin? Silin raised his eyebrows. He also guessed that he might have been discovered a long time ago. Moreover, this man said so much, as if he was deliberately talking to Silin, who was hiding in the dark. Silin didn't continue to hide. Following the man's words, the data on the door lock flashed twice. Silin knew that the door lock's password had been deciphered. After pushing the door open, Silin finally saw the appearance of the three people inside. Bisor was standing by the window and looking at Silin. The man in the wheelchair with half of his metal face had an indifferent expression, and the young man standing behind the wheelchair. Silin recognized this young man. Although this was the first time they met, before this, Silin had seen some information about this person from Shihuajing. Juno, famous for a long time. At the same time, Silin also noticed that Bisor and the man in the wheelchair had very similar pupils. They were both metallic in color, and when they looked at sunlight, their pupils would reflect silver white. It was the Shi family's signature eye color. The queen in his palm had an even bigger reaction. The Mother Nightmare taper was with Bisor. Bisor was obviously very angry at Silin's appearance. The smile that had been on his face all this time was now replaced by anger. Shi Luo, did you let him in? Great. Great. You're scared. Huh. You're scared. You can only kill me with someone else's hand. You didn't even dare to take revenge yourself, so you lost in the end. Silin's attention was focused on the name at the very front of Bisor's sentence. Shi Luo? That name had disappeared for a long time. If he remembered correctly, the 4-star academician of the League of Stars, who was an absolute authority in the study of radioactive elements and decay, was also called Shi Luo. However, the name Shi Luo was gradually replaced by another name. It was an unofficial title that people later gave him, Godfather. Chapter 424. Since Godfather was involved in this matter, the adjustment of the Army's project team must have been because of him. Godfather must have been the reason why the vaccine could be produced so quickly. However, Silin had never thought that Godfather would be a member of the Shi family. Silin had never seen Godfather's image before. Many confidential documents did not even have his image. This was partly due to the League of Stars government's intention, and partly due to Godfather himself. It should not be too difficult for him to get rid of his own information. Moreover, he had Juno with him. However, what exactly did Godfather mean this time? After talking for so long, it did not seem like he was going to make a move at all. Godfather was not angry at what Bisor said, nor did he refute it. Instead, he turned his head slightly and said to Silin, "The nightmare taper is in his heart, and it's already connected with it. In other words, Bisor's heart had to be removed if he wanted to take out the nightmare taper. Bisor would definitely die if that happened. With Bisor's current health condition, he probably would not be able to last long without the respirator, let alone removing his heart. He would not be able to take a transplant or any other treatment at all. This was what Godfather meant when he said that Godfather would kill him with someone else's hand. Bisor initially thought that Godfather would do it himself, but that was not the case. Instead, he was waiting for Sillin. Bisor's smile was a little twisted. Take my heart, just based on this ant-like thing? Ant-like thing? Are you talking about me? Sillin thought. Bisor looked at Sillin as if he was looking at a low-level animal. Kid, do you know what will happen if you kill me yourself? Sillin frowned and did not say anything. Godfather, answered before Bisor could continue. There are only two outcomes for killing a senior senator who has not been convicted. One is that he is convicted, and it must be a capital crime, and you will be fine. The other is that he dies and you die. However, I believe that Senator Bisor has already arranged all the funeral arrangements. With the influence and network of connections that he and his father have accumulated in the political arena, the latter is the most likely. Indeed, there was no concrete evidence to prove that Bisor was the mastermind behind everything. With Bisor's ability, he must have prepared everything to prove his innocence and scapegoats who could bear all the blame for what he had done. The big shots in a League of Stars didn't want to make a big move against people like Bisor. Even if they did, they couldn't be too impulsive or sudden. After all, a slight move could affect the whole situation. Every matter involved the interests of too many people, especially those in politics. On the other hand, if Sillin killed Bisor now, Sillin's crimes would be presented to all the decision-makers before tomorrow. Most of the time, the difference between black and white wasn't as clear as one would imagine. Have you decided? Godfather asked. What should I do? Sillin looked at Godfather. Sillin's question answered his decision. He could locate the Nightmare Taper's main body with Emperor, but Sillin wasn't sure how he could take it out safely and obtain the complete antibodies. Now that Carrie and Chiefing were lying there, Sillin had no idea if there were other people in the 11th team who were infected. However, Mo Hung might have been infected because he had taken off his protective suit to repair the armor and some equipment with the Army's engineers. There were only 4 of them here, and looking at the situation, Godfather and Juno would definitely not make a move. It was impossible for them to wait for the others, and Sillin couldn't afford to wait. Knowing Sillin's decision, Bisor shook his head as if he felt sorry for Sillin. He didn't put himself in a position where he was about to be slaughtered in the slightest, as if it didn't matter to him at all. He turned around and looked outside the window again. Godfather looked at Sillin and gestured for Juno to take the thing out. After Juno got the instruction, he took out a liquid container that was filled with green liquid. They had already prepared everything. Perhaps they had expected Sillin to come. After giving Sillin a brief reminder of the things to pay attention to, the Godfather fell silent. During this time, Bisor looked at the scenery outside the window calmly. When Godfather finished speaking, Juno's communicator rang. After looking at the message on the communicator, Juno said, "The last 2 secret bases of Miracle have been wiped out. The secret bases of Miracle have been exposed one after another, and almost all of them have been captured by the army. Miracle is gone." Godfather looked at Bisor. Bisor's reaction was still very calm, and he didn't feel any heartache at all. He was about to die. So what was the point of Miracle? To him, Miracle was nothing more than a plaything when he was alive, and he could use this plaything to toy with others. Using someone else's hands to wipe out the people left behind in the Red Branch, instigated internal strife in the Blue Branch, turned the dignified Godfather into a half-human, half-machine, and even forced the death of the Sheaf families by branch. He even created the peak of Miracle and stirred up the entire League of Stars. What was there for him to feel pity about? Just as Berta replied, "So what? At least I won. I won against all of you. Shi Luo, you will always be a loser." 10 minutes later, there was a beating heart in the container. It was the female nightmare taper inside that was pushing the detached heart to beat. Meanwhile, the original owner of the heart was lying on the windowsill. "What's the matter?" Celine was holding the liquid container in her hand. There was a bloody hole in his chest. Since he had obtained this, Scylla prepared to leave. He didn't have much time left. Before leaving, Scylla said to Godfather, "The people left behind in the Red Branch weren't abandoned. It's just that the person they've been waiting for can't come back." Not long after Scylla left, someone came to take care of Besor's body. Juno pushed Godfather away. "He's still too young," Godfather said softly. This was his evaluation of Scylla. He wasn't mature enough. However, it was precisely because he was young, and it was precisely because of his recklessness and stubbornness that he was clear about what was right and wrong. It wasn't a matter of weighing benefits. Speaking of Scylla, Gadar's bet? Which side did you bet on? Juno asked. "You'll know when the time comes." When Scylla arrived at the army's base with a liquid bottle, Max was already waiting for him there. Without saying or asking anything, Max brought Scylla to the prepared lab. All the extraction tools were already prepared. Knight, C.I. Jin Cheng, and the others were nowhere to be seen. Not even Lon and Alan were there. They were forcefully taken away. Lon's grandpa Fox had sent Brzett to forcefully take them away. This was the first time Phocas had issued such a forceful order after handing over his authority to Lon. The others were probably the same. When Max brought Scylla over, he wanted to say something but stopped himself. He felt uncomfortable in his heart as well. He knew all too well the twists and turns that came with being able to climb to his current position. There would always be someone to shoulder the burden of every war. This wasn't a world where one's innocence didn't matter. It was so helpless that it made one feel suffocated. However, Scylla didn't say anything. He didn't ask why Max was waiting here, how he knew that he had obtained the main body, or why the lab to extract the antibodies was already prepared. Godfather was connected to the army. They might even be working together against Besor. Scylla was able to speculate more since he knew all this. He knew everything, so there was no need for him to ask Max any further. Scylla extracted the main body, the nightmare taper, personally. The army didn't arrange any helpers for him, and he didn't ask anyone from the 11th Squad to help either. He completed a series of tasks on his own. He extracted all the antibodies from the nightmare taper and amplified them. He injected the antibodies into 2 seriously ill soldiers and gave them to Max after confirming that the antibodies were effective. He took a portion of the antibodies to Carrie and Chiefing's isolation room. Tang Xiuqiu and Mogaz were guarding the room. Xiuqiu was curled up into a ball beside Tang Xiuqiu. When they saw Scylla walk in, the 2 people guarding the room hurriedly stood up to greet him. Scylla wasn't wearing his armor. He waved the syringe in his hand and gave them a reassuring look. After injecting Carrie and Scarlet Wind with antibodies and seeing that their physiological indicators had returned to normal, Scylla finally left the temporary isolation room. The isolation room was going to be removed soon. Scylla asked Tang Xiuqiu, Mogaz, and Monquiero to watch over Carrie and Chiefing. They would go find Yudi after they recovered. Max had said, "Your contribution will not be denied," but Scylla had only smiled and made no comment about it. No matter how great his contribution was, once the matter was over, everything else would go with it. Otherwise, Scylla wouldn't have been sent to kill Besor. The League of Stars didn't just have one miracle. Back then, Besor was able to pull up a miracle. Even if Besor wasn't around anymore, there were still others like Besor in the League of Stars. As long as there was a chance, organizations like this would rise again and replace the position of the miracle. As for who would replace the miracle, that would depend on the wishes of the higher-ups. How many more of these things would happen? The League of Stars was huge. There are so many organizations, and they changed so quickly. Communidin, Si Fong, and many others were drowned in such an invisible tide. Scylla didn't go to the 11th Squad spaceplane. He knew that he was being monitored. The people from the army and others who were waiting for Scylla to take the blame, waiting to get rid of Scylla, or had other motives were all monitoring Scylla to prevent Scylla from escaping. In fact, Scylla had already guessed this when he decided to look for his mother, the Nightmare Taper. He didn't want to escape. Right now, he just wanted to be at ease for a little longer. Outside the foothold, there was gunfire and killing everywhere. The sky was tainted by such a battlefield. It was no longer blue as if it was the end of the world. However, there was a white cloud in such a sky. It was so white that it didn't seem real. Scylla lay on a space plane that was waiting to be repaired due to a malfunction. With his arm as a pillow, he watched the small cloud drift into the distance. It passed the fighter jets and the gunfire before disappearing into the horizon. Chapter 425. At the border between Sector C and Sector A of the League of Stars, there was a heavily guarded planet surrounded by 5 satellite planets. Right now, Scylla was on one of the 5 satellite planets. According to the star calendar, it had been more than 20 days since the Nightmare Taper incident. More than 20 days ago, Scylla had produced the complete antibodies, and the military had taken care of the aftermath of the miracle. After the incident was over, Scylla was brought to this planet. The 11th Squad had left planet J, C-335 before the incident, and no one knew where they went, be it the military or Vanguard. It was as if the 11th Squad had vanished in a thin air. Although the League of Stars was a huge planet, the 8 legions and some of the major families had sent people to investigate the 11th Squad to no avail. It was unsettling to the people who had been plotting something. At first, they thought that they had the 11th Squad in their hands after they imprisoned Scylla, but they didn't expect something like this to happen. However, to everyone's surprise, Scylla was unusually calm even though he was imprisoned on this satellite planet and awaiting his final trial. For the past 20 days, he had been doing the same thing every day. He would eat, sleep, wake up, read a book, and sleep again when he was tired. Of course, most of the time, he couldn't sleep well because people would come and talk to him from time to time. Right now, Scylla wasn't convicted, so Scylla couldn't be considered a criminal until his final trial. Therefore, compared to the convicted criminals, Scylla had a little freedom, but only a little. Similar to C.I. Jincheng's small base, this planet was shrouded in a gigantic protective shield and had an internal life support system to sustain life activities. The planet's primitive conditions weren't suitable for normal human habitation at all. Of course, it was also a form of protection to prevent the people imprisoned here from escaping. One part of the small room was surrounded by a transparent wall, and the ceiling was transparent as well. It was possible to see the stars outside and the patrolling fleets that passed by from time to time. Of the 5 satellite planets, the one Scylla was staying on had people who were waiting to be judged. They could be found guilty in the end, or they could be found innocent. Everything could only be decided after the final trial. The final trial would take place on the planets orbiting these few moons. Even from here, Scylla could see a round golden building on the big planet. It was the place where the trial was held. If they were found not guilty, they would be allowed to leave. If not, they would be imprisoned in the other 4 satellite planets' prisons. Ever since the prisons at Sector S were abolished, the League of Stars had decided to build prisons on these 4 satellite planets. The people in prison here were all very special criminals. Some were similar to Sifong back then, and some were criminals who had committed terrible crimes but couldn't be sentenced to death for the time being. All in all, the people in prison here were all once famous people. One of the people who came to ask questions yesterday told Scylla that his life was worth it to be imprisoned there. Worth it? Celine looked at the other 4 satellite planets. They looked cold and devoid of any signs of life. Ever since Scylla was imprisoned here, people would come to talk to Scylla every day. They used all kinds of methods, such as threats and temptations. However, since Scylla had some people supporting him, the people who came were polite to Scylla. At the very least, they didn't use force. These people who came to talk to him were people from all 8 corps and politicians. Their goal was nothing more than one: the shortcut channel technology. Scylla didn't know who said this, but the current situation was that all the decision-makers knew about it. This was why they were waiting for Scylla to fall into Besor's trap. Recently, the people who came to talk to Scylla said that they would be lenient if he handed over the channel technology. They even promised him a lot of benefits, but Scylla never relented. The people who came to talk to him in the past 2 days were especially numerous because they couldn't find the 11th Squad. They thought that Scylla was ready to give up on himself, and that the 11th Squad must have left for the other end of the passage. They weren't in the League of Stars, and they weren't planning to return either. Wouldn't returning be suicide? By Scylla's estimation, the day of a trial was almost here. The reason the trial date hadn't been decided until now was mainly because the people had underestimated the complexity of the matter. At first, they thought that they could tie Scylla to Besor's case, and then force Scylla to hand over the channel technology. At worst, they could go easy on him during the public trial. However, as Scylla was locked up, more and more people submitted applications to participate in the public trial, and the development of the matter exceeded their expectations. Moreover, these people who submitted applications to participate in the public trial originally weren't on Scylla's side. However, a few days after Scylla's phone was turned off and locked up, some people started to change their minds and stand. This made the decision-makers very troubled. As a result, the involvement grew bigger and bigger. The number of people participating in the final trial increased, and it became more and more complicated. The waiting time grew longer and longer, and even now, the date of the public trial hadn't been set. It sounded nice for the public to participate in the trial, but in reality, the so-called public who participated in the trial were also some important figures in the Star Alliance. The power and personal influence in their hands could shake an area, and they were also the leaders of local forces that had been officially recognized. These people would cooperate with the decision-makers and the higher-ups of the Star Alliance to maintain the stability and order of the Star Alliance. After every chaos, there would be a replacement between the old and the new. Take Alcinthus, for example. In the past, he was far from qualified to do this. The representative of Sector V to participate in the public trial and administrative affairs was another Sector V colonist, but this colonist had been stepped on during the chaos of the League of Stars this time. Alcinthus seized the opportunity to develop the Freedom Army into the largest and most formal force in Sector V, and during the Nightmare Taper incident, the Freedom Army was the first group in Sector V to receive treatment. This caused the already influential Freedom Army in Sector V to become even more popular in the sector. Although the bigwigs didn't really think much of the Freedom Army, and even less of these Sector V lunatics, they had to admit that a force of this scale would cause a lot of trouble in the future if they didn't take this opportunity to negotiate. Therefore, as the leader of the Freedom Army, Alcinthus also received an invitation from the decision-makers. The meaning was that after the chaos, they hoped that he could cooperate with them to re-establish order and maintain the stability of the League of Stars. The people of Sector V were the most worrisome of all. If they could have someone like Alcinthus to restrain, maintain, and focus their firepower, then the decision-makers would be more than happy to give Alcinthus an invitation. When Alcinthus accepted the invitation, he also submitted an application to participate in the trial. However, Alcinthus was alone, and his vote alone shouldn't have much influence. It wouldn't change the outcome either. Even if the decision-makers were displeased, they didn't take it to heart as long as they knew that the outcome wouldn't change. However, not long after, when the three leaders of Sector S's three great forces received the invitation from the decision-makers to maintain order, they expressed their agreement to cooperate with the League of Stars government and the army to maintain order in the League of Stars. The condition was that they would participate in the public trial. The people who received the invitation from the decision-makers did indeed have the right to participate in the trial. It was just that they had the right to choose whether to participate or not. Most of the time, if it didn't involve them or had nothing to do with them, these people wouldn't participate in this kind of secret, complicated, and scheming trial. This time, the decision-makers didn't expect that the position of the captain of a small hunter squad would involve so many people. Moreover, many of them were targets that the decision-makers wanted to rope in. Because of this, the decision-makers conducted an in-depth investigation into Scylla. The deeper the investigation, the more they discovered that Scylla wasn't a simple person. Right now, the decision-makers were a little regretful that they had dragged Scylla into Besor's incident. Of course, it was only a little regret, not absolute regret. After all, they coveted the passage technology more. Scylla looked at the starry sky outside. There were a few spaceports between the 5 planets and the central planet they revolved around. Right now, a starship had landed at the spaceport closest to Scylla's planet, and it didn't take long for a spaceplane to depart from the spaceport and fly towards him. Scylla had seen this situation many times already, and every time he did so, someone would come over and talk to Sillin and demand that he hand over the passage technology. Who was it this time? The answer was revealed very soon. I was thinking that you would show up soon. Sillin put down the book in his hand and looked at the newcomer. Yu Linglong walked into the small room and stared at the person sitting calmly on the chair with a complicated expression. Yu Linglong originally thought that since Sillin had the passage technology, he would definitely leave the League of Stars together with the 11th Squad when he realized that something was wrong. She didn't expect that Sillin would actually cooperate and come here. She knew that Sillin wouldn't give in so easily and would definitely have a backup plan. The increasing number of applications to participate in the trial was proof of that. Some of them were people who were more familiar with Sillin, such as Angenia and so on. The other group of people who submitted applications included people from both the political and military circles. They were all people who had interfered in the miracle incident or had secretly violated the law. There were a lot of people involved in the miracle, but a lot of them had erased the stain when the miracle had gone down. However, Yu Linglong didn't expect that Sillin would have the evidence and blackmail to force those people to change their minds. Sillin had relied on this blackmail to force those people to participate in the trial. It was true that the 11th Squad had left the League of Stars, but Cheto and Minji Arrow had stayed behind. They had shown the stain that some people thought had been erased a long time ago. During the years Sillin had been a hunter, he had never stopped collecting information other than when he was out on missions. For example, Sillin had obtained a fragment of a Lillo's star map and a chip from the Miracle base where Shueqiu and Chifeng had been captured. The chip contained a lot of information and even some secret transactions, and Sillin had been supplementing the information according to the chip. Now it was time to use them. What are you thinking? Or should I say, what are you trying to do? Yu Linglong asked with a frown. Perhaps it was because she was used to being in the Yu family. She unconsciously used a questioning tone when she spoke. However, she quickly realized that this wasn't a good way of speaking. After adjusting her tone, she said, I know that you have a lot of dirt on them, but those old foxes won't let you have it forever. Right now, it's only because it's too sudden that they don't have the time to deal with it. When the matter calms down, the situation will be disadvantageous to you. Sillin didn't say anything, and Yu Linglong looked a little annoyed. A while later, when Sillin didn't say anything, she continued, As far as I know, be it sincere or forced, you have a lot of supporters right now, but it still doesn't exceed half. If there are no surprises, the final trial will be held in 3 days. Among the people participating in the trial, Yu Linglong's investigation found that the number of people who supported Sillin was less than half. There were new supporters every day, including some famous people in the League of Stars. Even if they didn't have the right to participate in the trial, they would still use their connections. For example, Food King Hara, Great Master Jiosun of the pharmaceutical world, and former Senator Sangbo. Another example was the Hunters. Right now, Jifeng was busy working with Lan Hudi to deal with Heaven's Birth, so he didn't have the time to come personally. However, Jifeng, Lan Hudi, and Prisa, these 3-star level hunters had all contributed to this matter. Some of the people who submitted the application to participate in the trial were also because of them. Although the 8 great marshals hadn't made their stance clear, there were people in the 8 armies who had already expressed their support for Sillin, and the one leading them was Emoqing. There were also some people who had been instructed by Ci, Jinsheng, Knight, and Pride. Although they were confined by their families, and there was a limit to what they could do with their current abilities, it was enough. At least, not all of the 8 armies were standing on the opposite side. However, Yu Linglong didn't think that the number of people who supported Sillin would reach half in 3 days. This time, my grandfather and father won't be participating in the trial. The Yu family will be participating in the trial along with me and my 2 cousins. This can be considered a test from my grandfather. I will help you. If they stood on the wrong side, they would definitely be criticized in the competition for the successor. Yu Linglong's 2 cousins were standing on the other side, and only Yu Linglong chose to stand on Sillin's side. Many of Yu Linglong's subordinates were against her decision, so it was obvious that Yu Linglong was still under a lot of pressure. Sillin, if you take out the shortcut tunnel technology, I'm sure that more than half of the people will support it. In Yu Linglong's opinion, Silin didn't have the ability to protect this technology at the moment. Instead of that, he might as well take it out and make a deal with the decision-makers. Not only would he gain some benefits, he would also be able to avoid more jail time. I won't say anything about the tunnel, at least not now. I won't use the tunnel technology in exchange for the support of the trial. Still, thank you for your help. Here's a gift for you. Silin smiled as he took out an item and handed it to Yu Linglong. It was the ruby that had been found on the transport ship of the Duance family that had been slaughtered. Yu Linglong's pupils constricted when she saw the gem that had a fracture on it. Blood Sun. The ruby in her palm reflected a demonic blood-red light. At this moment, Yu Linglong's emotions could no longer be described as complicated. Blood Sun was a rather precious ruby, and the owner of this ruby was Yu Linglong's second cousin, Yu Xing. However, Yu Linglong had only seen Blood Sun once. At that time, Blood Sun hadn't been cut into ornaments yet. Later on, Yu Xing embedded the cut, Blood Sun, into a ring and gave it to his mistress, Padalola. Later on, Silin found Padrola when he was investigating Yu Xing. He found a photo of her and Yu Xing, and in the photo, the ring on Padrola's finger was this ruby. Padlola looked like a woman who relied on her appearance to get her position, but in reality, she wasn't simple at all. She was also one of Yu Xing's right-hand men. Yu Linglong had already sent a few subordinates to investigate her, but none of them had received any news. Where did you find it? Yu Linglong remembered that the earliest information she received said that Padlola liked Blood Sun very much and always carried it with her. Silin explained the situation. Not only that, when you return, you'll receive some information about that massacre. Yu Linglong nodded and put away the chipped gem. According to Silin, the massacre might have been Yu Xing's doing. Yu Linglong had suspected it before, but she hadn't found any evidence at the time. If there was sufficient evidence, then the Duance family would definitely stand against Yu Xing. It was very possible that Silin would gain another supporter, and all Yu Linglong had to do was to arrange things properly. The Duance family would also become a helping hand in the competition between her and Yu Xing. There were no surveillance cameras in this place, and even if there were, they would have been dismantled. After all, no one who came to talk to Silin would want their conversation to be leaked. Silin stared at Yu Linglong's space plane and thought about the news Yu Linglong had brought him. The trial was in 3 days. Although the notice hadn't reached this place yet, it had to be true. 3 days should be enough. Yu Linglong's analysis wasn't entirely correct. Silin had asked Chedo to bring out the weaknesses of the people who had done many large-scale illegal transactions with Miracle and drag so many people into this mess. One reason was to gain more support, and the other reason was to stall for time. While he was thinking, Silin noticed that a new starship had docked at the spaceport. It was a military starship, and anyone who could use this kind of starship had to be of very high status in the military. After that, another space plane flew over from the spaceport. Which big shot in the military is it this time? While pondering, Silin looked up and discovered that another medium-sized space plane had flown past the spaceport. Compared to the previous military starship, this space plane was far too plain and ordinary. However, it was exactly because of this space plane that the security at the spaceport suddenly tightened. Even the patrol fleets were gathering at the spaceport, as if they were on high alert. Silin could feel their nervousness even from where he was standing. The spaceplane stopped at the spaceport for a moment before flying over. It was probably a routine inspection just now. At a landing field not far away from where Silin was being held, a spaceplane with a military insignia on it landed. The hatch opened, and a man walked out of it. He looked to be middle-aged, but the military rank and a certain special insignia on his military uniform were enough to send shivers down people's spines. The person in charge of this place quickly walked over and saluted him. That person seemed kind, or rather, he gave off a refined and easygoing feeling. The duo walked toward where Silin was being held while talking to each other. However, they had only taken 2 steps when the man looked up and saw a space plane flying in their direction and preparing to land. After the ordinary-looking space plane had landed, the hatch opened and 2 people walked out side by side. One was a man and the other was a woman. The man's age couldn't be determined, and his appearance wasn't outstanding or ugly. He was dressed casually, but this seemingly ordinary person made everyone who got close to him feel an inexplicable sense of fear from the bottom of their hearts. The woman walking beside him was wearing the style of training clothes that mercenaries and hunters liked. She was frowning slightly, and no one knew what she was thinking about. She walked and talked to the person beside her. When the person in charge who was accompanying the officer saw the two of them, he felt as if there was a gun pointed at his head. The man was big trouble, and the woman, when he first saw her, the person in charge looked like he had seen a ghost. He stared at her for a long time before he suddenly remembered something and carefully glanced at the officer beside him. Sure enough, the officer beside him was also staring blankly at her. "Hey girl, he's looking at you. Aren't you going to say hello?" Si Huang smiled and looked at Pianhua, who had appeared in public for the first time. Pianhua paused and said, "Why should I say hello to someone I don't know?" Si Huang raised his hand and rubbed Pianhua's head, messing up the hairstyle that the little girl had taken a long time to do. Before she lost her temper, Si Huang said, "You go and find Silin. I'll stop this one." "Okay." Pianhua didn't say much and directly went to the passage where Silin was kept. Soon, she entered the passage and disappeared. After watching Pianhua go in, Si Huang walked to the side and took out a cigarette. He leaned against a pillar and slowly smoked. The person in charge's eyes twitched. Generally speaking, smoking was not allowed here. However, that was generally. If it was this person, then forget it. It was better to avoid trouble. Wei Ting watched the figure that was extremely similar to the one in his memory disappear at the end of the passage. It was really similar, especially when he looked at people sideways. The curve of his eyebrows was exactly the same as Si Fong's. What was the first time he saw Si Fong? Wei Ting thought back. It might not be easy to remember that person just by looking at his appearance. Standing in the middle of a group of female soldiers, he wasn't the most beautiful, nor was he eye-catching. But after that, he could clearly remember that person and remember that person's appearance. He was wearing a training uniform, holding a submachine gun casually, and his every frown and smile had a heart-palpitating flamboyance and ease. Then, such a person kept appearing in his mind, lingering and lingering. He didn't know when it had penetrated into the depths of his heart. But he was no longer here. Wei Ting waved his hand, indicating that the person in charge didn't need to accompany him, and walked straight to Si Huang. Although Little Fong's last words were to let her choose freely, if that girl also chooses to enter the army, I'll break her legs. Si Huang looked up at the entrance of the passage. His calm tone was steady and firm, and his imposing manner was irrefutable. However, he didn't look at Wei Ting, who was walking over, and didn't even look at him. But the good thing is, she didn't let me down. Being a hunter is better than entering the army and following her mother's footsteps. She wants to be a hunter? That's right. Si Huang seemed to have thought of something interesting. He smiled and pointed to the place where Silin was locked up. Her future captain is locked up there. Chapter 4:26. When Pianhua came in, Silin was wondering who was in the two aircraft that came one after the other. Seeing Pianhua, Silin was surprised for a moment, then smiled and said, "I didn't expect it to be you." First, Silin really didn't expect Pianhua to come. Second, Silin didn't expect Pianhua to appear in his original appearance. Silin already knew that Pianhua and Si Fong were very similar. Moreover, Pianhua appearing in his original appearance would definitely cause a small sensation, especially for those who had some status in the military and those who were familiar with Si Fong. "You're really carefree," Pianhua said after coming in and looking around. She originally thought that Silin would be very depressed, but now it didn't seem to be the case. No wonder Si Huang said that there was no need to worry about Silin. It's useless to worry anyway. I heard that the final trial will be held in 3 days. Pianhua was very confused about Silin's indifferent attitude. How could this person be so calm? It should be known that the final trial would decide life and death. Even if he didn't die, he would probably spend the rest of his life in prison, just like his mother, trapped in a narrow space. From then on, he would have to deal with all kinds of hidden hands. "Yes, I already know that. Not worry," I said, It's useless to worry. You're really... Pianhua wanted to go over and pry open Silen's brain to see what was inside. Pianhua paused, then suddenly asked, "Where's the cat?" "It left." At that time, Hui Mao was very dissatisfied with Silen's arrangement, but in the end, he still listened to Silen's arrangement and left with a U. Pianhua was silent for a moment, then asked mysteriously, "Do you really have a way to win this trial?" Silen didn't answer. "Forget it." Seeing that Silen didn't want to say, Pianhua waved her hand. "I just came to see how you are. I'm not qualified to participate in the trial in 3 days, but there's someone who is qualified, and he will support you." "Si Huang?" "Yes, he's outside. Gaydar is also participating in the trial. He should support you." Pianhua said a lot. She talked about what happened outside after Silen was locked up, and about Godfather and the others. However, after saying so much, she could tell that Pianhua was indeed a little anxious. Mentioning those topics was just to cover up her anxiety. Silen listened quietly. He knew that Pianhua was the reason why Si Huang supported him, and Si Huang and Gaydar were not the main factors. After all, they only had 2 votes, and Si Huang and Gaydar's influence in the military and the political world was actually not as great as Pianhua's. Now that Pianhua had revealed himself, he was actually helping Silen in another way. Because of Pianhua's appearance, Pianhua's stance would definitely affect those who had a good relationship with Si Fong. Wuxia had once said that if Si Fong had not been punished back then, the current situation of the army might not be like this. This also showed that Si Fong's influence back then was indeed great. 20 years had passed, and among those who had a good relationship with Si Fong, there was no lack of people who had climbed to high positions and had the qualifications to participate in the trial. And Pianhua's appearance would make these people think more before voting, and the number of people who supported Silen would increase again. These people were Pianhua's goal. "Thank you." Silen looked at Pianhua and said seriously. Pianhua, who had been drinking water from a cup, hurriedly looked away. "Forget it. If you really want to thank me, after this incident, let me join your team." Silen smiled and nodded. "Okay." When Pianhua came out of the passage, Si Huang and Wei Ting stood on either side of the passage. After glancing at Wei Ting, Pianhua didn't look at him anymore and walked towards Si Huang. Si Huang casually threw away the remaining half of his cigarette. Standing not far away, the person in charge's eyes twitched. He kicked the cleaning robot that was in a dormant state and told it to clean up the trash. "Are you relieved now? I told you not to worry about that brat. He's so sneaky. How could he be trapped here so easily?" Si Huang raised his hand and messed up Pianhua's hair, which he had tidied up before entering the passage. Wei Ting narrowed his eyes when he saw Si Huang's hand fluttering on Pianhua's head. The person in charge, who was waiting not far behind Wei Ting, shivered. He suddenly felt that the temperature around him had dropped a lot. Si Huang fluttered even more happily. Pianhua punched him so hard that not only was he not angry, but the smile on his face grew wider and wider. Wei Ting wanted nothing more than to slap him. Si Huang was showing off and angering Wei Ting. "See, your daughter is still closer to me. As for you, as a blood father, you're nothing but a fart." Before Pianhua flew into a rage, Si Huang hugged Pianhua and said, "Let's go back and continue teaching that guy in the wheelchair a lesson." The guy in the wheelchair that Si Huang mentioned was Godfather. Actually, Godfather had come with them, as well as Azrael and a few others. Even if they didn't have the right to participate in the trial, they still wanted to watch the trial. At this moment, Godfather was looking at the information in his hands with a panda on his head. The dark circles on Godfather's half of his normal face were caused by Pianhua. When Pianhua was beating him up, the rest of Azrael, including Si Huang, were watching the show from the side. After Si Huang and Pianhua walked away, Wei Ting stood there quietly. However, the person in charge didn't dare to go up and talk to him. Wei Ting's aura was too strong. Even an idiot could feel that Wei Ting was in a bad mood. The robot that ran over to clean up the cigarette, but that Si Huang had thrown there, exploded before it could do so. It was used as a punching bag. The explosion caused the person in charge and some guards not far away to tremble, but they acted as if they didn't see or hear anything. They looked straight ahead and stood in perfect military posture. Wei Ting didn't even look at the robot that exploded, nor did he go into the tunnel to talk to Sillin. Wei Ting didn't have the mood to care about his original purpose of coming here. After watching Si Huang's aircraft leave, Wei Ting left as well. During the 3 days of waiting for the trial, those who paid attention would notice that the magnetic field around the central planet of Judgment had changed a little. From time to time, there would be some abnormalities, but the technicians couldn't find the reason. During these 3 days, many things had happened. The people participating in the trial had been confirmed, so it wasn't about them. Instead, it was about a major event that shocked the entire League of Stars. The 4 major hunter groups were finally going to become 3. The head commander of Heaven's Birth, Bloomer, was killed by Ji Feng and Lan Hudy. The other higher-ups of Heaven's Birth also met with accidents. Some died, some retreated. In short, it was only a matter of time before the 4 major hunter groups became 3. Not long after the Nightmare Taper incident in the League of Stars, the news of the 4 major hunter groups becoming 3 became the hottest topic in the League of Stars. In comparison, Sillin's incident was much more low-key. After all, the public wasn't familiar with the final trial and didn't understand the secrets behind it. When the time came, they would just listen to what the media said. If the media didn't say anything, the majority of the people in the League of Stars wouldn't even know about Sillin's incident. 3 days later, Sillin walked out of this small room and boarded an aircraft full of guards. He headed to the central planet to receive the final trial. Unlike the entrance that the people participating in the trial used to enter, Sillin was brought in from the basement. It was a bit dark inside. This kind of darkness, coupled with the solemn atmosphere and the emblem of the highest court of the League of Stars that could be seen everywhere, made the people who came in to receive the trial feel oppressed. However, compared to some of the people who were being judged, Sillin was much calmer. Even the escorts were very curious. Was this kid's reflex arc too long, or did he really not care? There was a round table in front of him with a chair inside. After Sillin sat on it, a transparent barrier appeared around the round table, isolating Sillin from the outside world and preventing Sillin from escaping. After all, he hadn't been convicted yet, so there were no handcuffs or other restraints on Sillin's body. The round table slowly rose up. Sillin sat on the chair inside the round table and sensed the changes in his surroundings. He could sense the increasingly unstable magnetic field, as well as the many powerful auras that were both familiar and foreign were surrounding him. Golden light shone in, splitting apart the darkness coming from the basement. However, this wasn't sunlight. It was the illumination of the golden round building itself. It was said that this light represented holiness and justice, getting rid of all filth and finding the path of redemption for the fallen. Perhaps this was the original idea of the builders and adjudicators here, but gradually it was filled with unavoidable hypocrisy. How did the people who were being judged here feel when they saw this light? Did they feel that this light was actually colder than the darkness in the basement? Or was it more despairing? Sillin opened his eyes. The round table had gradually emerged from the ground. This was a wide field, and Sillin was in the center of this circular field. Around the field were some small, scale-like sections, and each section had 3 to 5 people sitting. Among these people, only one was a participant, and the others were accompanying them. Sillin glanced around. Sitting in the top circle were 3 people in military uniforms. They had a special badge on them, a badge unique to the Heavenly Edict Empire. Some distance away from them, also sitting in the top circle, were a few senior senators. On the second floor sat Ji Feng, Lan Hudy, Navigator Tamer, Sin Prisa, and Hunter Gadar, who was recognized after Osculo's death. There was also Hidden Wuxia, Nabila, and Si Huang. Originally, the 3 Heavenly Edict Empire representatives didn't plan to show up. Most of the time, they just watched from behind the scenes. However, now that all 5-star hunters and the 3 troublesome people were here, they couldn't control the situation without them. Nabila didn't plan to come either. He never participated in such trivial matters, but this time, both Wuxia and Si Huang were here. Even all the star hunters and the 3 Heavenly Edict Empire representatives were here. If he wasn't here, he would definitely feel like he was below his status. Moreover, Nabila was happy to see Sillin being judged. After all, He had lost a few of his subordinates because of Silin. After that, Silin saw a lot of familiar faces. Yu Linglong and her two cousins were sitting in the three scales on the Yu family side. Silin didn't know the representatives of the Ci, Ji, and Fiegler families, but Ci, Jincheng, Knight, and Pride were all sitting there with worried eyes. Also, they didn't look as mentally well as Silin. It looked like they hadn't slept well for a long time. Shi Huajing was representing his family, and the people behind him were arguing. Shi Huajing ignored them and sat there thinking about something. The representative of the Andrira family was Lung. Young Master Lung had a serious expression on his face, and he was saying something inaudible. But judging from the reaction of the little old man behind him, it probably wasn't anything good. Silin also saw Angenia, and behind her were Jin Sheng, Jin Xingfu, and Jin Xingji. There was also Akanus, who was currently in the limelight at Sector V. Qing didn't come with him, and the one accompanying Akanus was in Relson. Some very influential people from the electronic media had arrived as well. They would never miss something like this, and Alan and the others were among them. There were also people from Limitless and Lavish. Other than that, there were also a lot of people that Silin didn't know. However, Silin saw kindness in their eyes. It didn't matter if it was a request from someone or their own decision. Silin remembered them. He remembered that they had resisted the pressure and stood on his side at a time like this. The lineup for this trial was much stronger than Fang's trial back then. All 5-star rank hunters, all 3 Heavenly Edict generals, senior senators, army commanders, influential families in the League of Stars, media, regional force leaders, and so on. No one would have thought that a mere team leader of a small hunter group would attract such a large group of people to participate in the trial. Inside the court, the golden light dazzled everyone a little, but the people being interrogated sat there calmly and watched everything. Chapter 427. Someone at the top was narrating Celine's crimes, and he made Bisor sound quite innocent. If he had not experienced it himself, he would definitely think that Bisor was an amiable person who gave his all for the Star Alliance and died a tragic death. The person reading the crimes was someone familiar. Silin had seen him when he went to the 6th Division not long ago. He was the person in charge of the 6th Division's secret experimental base, Greyer. Come to think of it, why did Greyer succeed when the rest of the people who were sent to Miracle as spies in the army failed? Not only did he succeed, but he also happened to bring back an intact Nightmare Taper. However, the Nightmare Taper incident was over. Now, Greyer's true stance was clear. He was working for Bisor. How could he read such a hypocritical statement without changing his expression? Greyer was really shameless. However, Silin did not feel that it was embarrassing to face such crimes. The one who felt embarrassed should be the 6th Division's commander, Kikila. Obviously, Greyer stood there and read the crimes without Kikila's consent. Kikila might not even know that Greyer would do such a thing. Many people in the upper echelons of the army knew that Greyer was from the 6th Division and was deeply trusted by Kikila. Obviously, everyone would think of Kikila in this situation. Since Greyer was standing here, Kikila would definitely stand against Silin. However, Kikila had not said anything before. Now, Silin looked over and saw that Kikila's face was pale. If it was possible, Kikila would probably run over and strangle Greyer to death. Kikila really didn't want to get involved in this mess. Maybe he did want to stand on the opposite side and force Silin to hand over the shortcut technology, but as the situation developed and more people were involved, Kikila didn't want to get into a conflict with them. Originally, he was going to give up at the last minute, but he didn't expect Greyer to suddenly appear. Kikila looked at the few old politicians in an unfriendly manner and snorted. Silin did not listen to those formulaic things. He paid attention to the changes in the magnetic field around him and could already feel the familiar frequency of changes. Naturally, there were many who defended Silin as well. Lung even cursed the senior senator in front of so many people. The senator, who had always been as calm as a mountain, was scolded until his face turned from white to red, and then from red to black. However, he couldn't retort. He knew that he couldn't say too much at a time like this, or the other party would find a loophole. That was why he responded with silence. Behind Lung, The little old man Brizet was so anxious that his hair was about to stand on end. He tugged at Lung a few times, but it was completely useless. Young Master Lung seemed to have cursed out all the words he had been holding back for more than 20 days. Moreover, it was rare for him to have such a clear and meticulous thought process. His choice of words was also more professional, which made it even more infuriating. Knight and the others didn't have the right to speak, but that didn't stop them from cheering. They clapped their hands one after another, turning up the megaphone and clapping with all their might. Although it was a little noisy for a period of time, the few heavyweights sitting in the upper echelons didn't say anything. In their eyes, this was just the quarrel of children. Almost everyone who came here knew their choice. So, whether they argued or not, the result would be the same. Why should they lower themselves to argue with the younger generation? Pianhua, who was standing behind Si Huang, frowned as he watched all this. The situation didn't seem too good. At least, from the reactions of those people in the debate that Lung had started, it was still a little uncertain that more than half of the supporters would support him. He just didn't know what those who hadn't shown any expression of interest up until now meant. Si Huang, on the other hand, was not in the mood to listen to the quarrel of these children. After yawning, he looked over at Wuxia. That guy was sharing a tub of ice cream with his pet rat, and didn't look worried at all. As far as Si Huang knew, Wuxia still valued Silin a lot, but until now, Wuxia didn't have much of a reaction. Ice Cream, who was holding a big tub of ice cream with Wuxia, suddenly twitched his ears. He stopped what he was doing and looked up at the top of the building. Or more accurately, he was looking at something outside through the top of the building. "What's wrong?" Wuxia asked, biting his spoon. After quietly sensing for a while, Ice Cream's ears twitched again. "That fat cat is here, and I think there's something else." The monitoring station on the planet also detected the magnetic field changes in the planet's periodic region, and the changes were getting bigger and bigger. However, it was the time of the trial, so it wasn't good to disturb the people there. So, the station chief only asked people to take more precautions and suppress the news. In the court, the debate was over, and it was time for the voting. The voting would last for an hour, and it was time for the people who participated in the trial to consider carefully. However, those who had been quiet all this time didn't need to consider. They just wanted to vote at the last moment. Out of caution, they wouldn't cast their votes so quickly, and those who voted immediately at the beginning were quite firm in their stance. Time passed slowly, and the atmosphere in the court was a little strange. Lung and the others were nervous, but in contrast, the people on the other side didn't care. There were also some people who were nervous. After all, if they chose, they would definitely offend the people on the other side. Although the voting wasn't transparent, everyone knew that as long as they had the means, they could find out everything. After half an hour, less than 3/5 of the people had voted, and the remaining 2/5 were still sitting there waiting. However, in secret, some people were already contacting each other, urging them to vote. After 40 minutes, the few people at the top noticed that something was wrong, and they immediately contacted some people outside. After hearing those people's reports, the decision-makers at the top all frowned. One look, and they knew that the current problem was quite serious. This should be a random phenomenon. Although the magnetic field has been fluctuating for such a long time, it hasn't exceeded the warning line. It should be over soon. Before the director of the monitoring station could finish, the magnetic field's anomaly suddenly became violent, soaring to an extremely dangerous range in a short period of time. It was enough to make the alarm on the entire planet go off at the highest level, and the alarm on the planet went silent not long after it rang. It wasn't just the alarms. Even the lighting, communication, and other electronic and mechanical devices began to show abnormalities. The golden lights in the court began to flicker, and the devices that controlled the airflow and temperature also gradually lost their functions. The court was a little stuffy and hot. After all, there were so many people around. In an instant, everyone inside began to panic. What was going on? Something like this had never happened before. The 3 heavenly edict lords sitting at the top immediately ordered for the top of the court to be opened. Even if they wanted to escape, the top was the biggest escape route. After the flashing golden light above the court was opened, all the lights inside were extinguished, All the communication devices were completely paralyzed, and all the electronic and mechanical devices collectively stopped working. The display screen was a mess. However, this wasn't the focus of everyone's attention. The focus was on the sky. It was daytime, but the vortex that appeared in the sky was very conspicuous. The vortex was as bright as a nebula. It felt like it was right in front of them, but they couldn't touch it. In fact, there was still some distance between the vortex and the planet. But because the vortex was too big, whether it was the people on the 5 satellite planets or the people on the central planet, they all felt that the place they were in was about to be swallowed by this beautiful but terrifying vortex. They didn't care about what happened to Scylla now. In their hearts, Scylla's matter was nothing compared to the situation in front of them. However, there were still people who paid attention to Scylla, such as Pianhua and Lung. Originally, they wanted to persuade Scylla to find a chance to leave. Through some channels, they knew that among the people who had voted, those who supported Scylla weren't more than half. Even if it was close, there were still some people who didn't vote. The risk was too great. If it was possible, they might as well take the opportunity to escape. However, when they looked at Scylla, they realized that the person waiting for the trial was sitting quietly in the same place. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and his eyes were smiling as he looked at the sky. Hidden Wuxia stroked the tuft of fur on Ice Cream's head and asked, "What is that? Is it a shortcut?" Ice Cream was looking in that direction with his eyes wide open. When he heard Hidden Wuxia's question, he replied, "It should be, but the cause of this situation isn't just that vortex. It's the mechanical language radiation frequency. There's more than one creator, and the main one is that fat cat." By now, the people in the magistrate's court had come out one after another and were gathered in the square around the magistrate's court. There was a wide square around the magistrate's court called the Golden Square. It wasn't because the square itself was golden. On the contrary, the material on the ground of the square was not golden. However, this special material would reflect the golden light of the magistrate's court, and the reflected golden light would seem to float in the square. It was like a sacred place in legends. Although there were no electronic projectors and light screens, the people still had other means to see the scene in space beyond the planet. When the people from the magistrate's court came out one after another, a small starship flew out of the huge vortex that was dotted with nebulae. Compared to the huge vortex, the starship was really too small. When everyone's attention was focused on the spacecraft that flew out of the vortex, they paid special attention to it. Moreover, many people were very familiar with this spacecraft. It was the Vanguard 11th Division's free spaceship. They opened the shortcut. This was the first thought that came to everyone's mind when they saw the 11th Team starship. At this moment, Angenia's feelings were different from the others. She was a little nervous and a little excited. She couldn't control her excitement. She had a feeling that something was going to happen next. However, before everyone could express their opinions on the appearance of this starship, a huge hull appeared behind the 11th Team starship. The difference between the small starship and this big fellow was like the difference between a small fishing boat and a luxury liner. It was dignified, gorgeous, and unconcealable luxurious. There was also an aura that couldn't be ignored. Everything about this huge starship showed how special it was. This wasn't a starship owned by the League of Stars. It was obvious from its appearance alone, but the most shocking thing about it was the symbol on the starship. A lot of people looked at Angenia and the other Golden Beginning members after they saw the symbol. It was because Angenia, Jin Sheng, Jin Xingfu, and Jin Xingji were all wearing the same symbol, and it was right next to Golden Beginnings. Normally, people would only pay attention to Golden Beginnings symbol, and they wouldn't pay attention to the smaller symbol next to it. But now, everyone was looking at Angenia in unison, and some people were already discussing it in private. They wouldn't believe that this new starship had nothing to do with Golden Beginning, even if they were beaten to death. Prisa looked at the symbol on the gigantic starship, and then at Angenia, whose eyes were turning red and her body was trembling. She knew that it must be about that person that made the queen of the Golden Beginning Empire lose her composure. Had the man that the older generation of Sector S called useless and living off a woman finally returned? This huge starship was just the beginning. After this massive starship appeared, Many other, similarly massive starships appeared one after another. Apart from this, there were also some slightly smaller warships that appeared. There were many differences between their appearances and the many warships in the Star Alliance. They were ostentatious and luxurious. In Lung's words at that moment, they were overflowing with a noble aura and an awesome aura of enormous wealth and manpower. It was obvious that they belonged to the same force at first glance. Just what kind of person could possess such enormous manpower and wealth? Starships came out one after another, surrounding this central planet and distributed in space. Just how many starships were there? Everyone had already forgotten to count. All they knew was that the sky was packed with starships, and none of them were smaller than the 11th Squad starship. The people on the planet were only able to see a part of the starship, but the League of Stars of Space Patrol fleet had the clearest view. Right now, they were all staring at the starship with their mouths agape and a little scared. Such a fleet was too big, and its aura was too oppressive. Coupled with its sudden appearance, no one knew how to react. The three Heavenly Edict experts had their own communication channel. After contacting the people at the space station, they said to the other decision-makers, "They're requesting an audience with our highest officer." After that, the three Heavenly Edict experts calmly glanced at Angenia's people in Cylin's place. Then, they suddenly glowed, and they were covered in armor in the next moment. The armor made them look twice as big as before, but it didn't look out of place at all. Before anyone could get a good look at the Heavenly Edict armor, the three Heavenly Edict experts vanished into thin air. Cylin stared at where the three Heavenly Edict experts had vanished to. He was curious about the armor they were wearing because it was unique to the Heavenly Edict experts. Moreover, there was no way they could wield such speed and control armor without an incredibly strong body. For example, if C.I. Jincheng were to wear the same armor, he would be moving at the speed of a turtle compared to the three Heavenly Edict experts. That was the difference. It didn't take long before a space plane that no one had seen before landed on the Golden Plaza. It must have received permission from the three Heavenly Edict experts to land on the Golden Plaza at this time. The patrolling fleet and Golden Plaza soldiers didn't make a move, but they were staring at the space plane warily. They didn't know what order they had received, but they looked incredibly nervous. After the space plane landed, the hatch opened and a shadow flashed towards Cylin. It was so fast that no one could see it clearly. The guns that the soldiers had just raised broke into several pieces. When they came back to their senses, they discovered that it was a chubby gray cat. Hui Mao circled around Cylin and revealed his true form after failing to notice that Cylin was injured and tortured. He jumped on his Cylin's shoulder, wagged his tail, and started bragging about his achievement. The 11th Squad hadn't arrived yet, and the three Heavenly Edict experts hadn't let them in yet. Hui Mao couldn't care less about that. He simply followed the mist Bodhisattva people over. The three Heavenly Edict experts didn't say anything when they saw him. Hui Mao thought that it was because he was a special case. Yeah, keep showing off. Little Ice Cream, who was nestled on Yin Wuji's side, saw that fatty SH*T was getting carried away again and scoffed. What a shame. Soon, everyone's attention was drawn back to the space plane because someone had come out of it. The two squads of guards were wearing different uniforms. One was the Mist Bodhisattva Imperial Army, and the other was the Jin family, one of the three kings. The leader of the Mist Bodhisattva Imperial Army's guards was Tu Ba. It was rare for Tu Ba to wear the uniform of the Mist Bodhisattva Imperial Army this time. Cylin thought that Tu Ba and his men would be fighting in secret. It was thanks to Cylin that Tu Ba was able to wear the Mist Bodhisattva Imperial Army's uniform. After learning about the shortcut technology, Tu Ba and a group of people who were supposed to be fighting in secret were reorganized into a diplomatic unit. The two squads stood on either side of the spaceplane's door. Then, a figure walked out of the spaceplane gracefully and innocently with a friendly and harmless smile. The corner of Cylin's eyes twitched. Why is Guan Feng here? A young man walked out of the spaceplane behind Guan Feng. He didn't show any stage fright, but there was a sense of novelty in his eyes compared to Guan Feng's. He looked around and paused on Cylin for a moment. Then, He grinned and nodded at Scylla before looking at the others. In the end, his gaze stopped at Angenia. Then, he quickly walked over to her. If it wasn't for the etiquette of nobles, he would have run over there already. Second Grandma, hearing about you is better than meeting you in person. The League of Stars crowd. Second Grandma? Jin Xingming was speaking in the common language of the League of Stars, but everyone could understand what he was trying to say. Jin Xingming had studied hard in order to follow Jinya here. He wasn't this diligent even back at the affiliated schools. The Jin family guards were following behind Jin Xingming, and their eyes were filled with kindness and respect when they looked at Angenia and Genshin. Guanfeng didn't interrupt the Jin family's bonding session. Instead, he walked towards Scylla. TSK, you sure have a hard life here. Guanfeng wasn't speaking in the Mist Bodhisattva language, but the common language of the League of Stars instead. Unlike Jin Xingming's awkward pronunciation, Guanfeng spoke fluently. Guanfeng had probably put in a lot of effort just to get here. Scylla curled his lips. Do you really have to be so happy when you're in a better place? Coach Guan? Jinya was negotiating with the 3 Heavenly Edict generals right now, so he couldn't come over immediately. After all, he was the highest-ranking officer of this fleet. It didn't take long for the decision-makers to inform the judges that the trial would be postponed. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. A lot of people were already regretting their decision to postpone the trial because the situation had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The decision-makers of the League of Stars could no longer treat Scylla as a simple person when they were weighing right and wrong. The more they interacted with the people of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, the more they understood Scylla's capabilities. Compared to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, which wasn't any weaker than the League of Stars, Bisor's influence was completely ignored. A new era was about to arrive, and new situations and opportunities were about to emerge. Everyone had already made up their minds which was more important and which was more important. The trial was postponed for 3 days. 3 days later, Scylla's trial was, as expected, acquitted almost unanimously. When Scylla officially walked out of the court, Wuxia asked him, "Did you expect something like this to happen?" Scylla didn't say anything. He simply smiled as a tacit admission. Before this, Moon and the others had worked together with Shi Tang to perfect the shortcut technology and locate the passage points. It was why Scylla had cooperated with them and come to this trial. He didn't want to run away. He wanted to use another method to force the old foxes of the League of Stars to change their attitude. The huge lineup of judges before the passage was the first round of demonstrations, and the second round of demonstrations would be even bigger after the passage was opened. Scylla thinks that Scylla is going to tell the decision-makers and the forces that are ready to make trouble in the open and in the shadows that I, Scylla, am not someone you can capture and use as cannon fodder. Scylla wouldn't expose himself too much if he wasn't completely confident. These people would seize any opportunity to kill him, a potential threat, and drag down the 11th Squad and the people who truly wanted to help Scylla with their lives. Wouldn't it be better to wait until he was confident and kill him in one go? Moreover, as the shortcut technology was developed, Scylla would also search for other galaxies besides the Mist Bodhisattva tribe and the League of Stars. Scylla didn't want to be tied down by so many people in the future. After this incident, those people would have to think twice before trying to take advantage of Scylla again. A hunter's achievements weren't something they could toy with. What if they don't make it in time? Wuxia asked again. Then force them to change their verdict. Wuxia chuckled. Rather than say that those people schemed against you, it's more accurate to say that you schemed against each other. Wuxia waved his hand and recalled Little Ice Cream, who was fighting with Hui Mao and biting each other's fur in animal form. Then, he left the court. Scylla once again looked at the dazzling building that was glowing with golden light. When the word holy no longer represented noble justice and salvation, when people realized that reality was crueler than they had imagined, faith would be so dim that it would make people despair, wouldn't it? What kind of mood did Si Fong have when he walked out of this place that the League of Stars praised as holy and dignified? The heavens created metal, but they also preserved slag. No matter how holy and dignified a building was, it was still controlled by the human heart. Scylla hoped that the building's golden color could retain its original purity. Sillin turned around and left the highest court. He walked through the golden plaza. The golden light floating on the plaza wouldn't ripple just because someone walked past it. Sillin walked through the floating golden light and walked into the distance. After the trial, Mist Bodhisattva tribe and the League of Stars established diplomatic relations within half a year. Not long after the establishment of diplomatic relations, Sillin's name appeared on the secret list of the League of Stars' military after Ji Feng, Lan Hudi, Tamir, Prisa, and Gaidar. At the same time, a star symbol appeared in front of Sillin's name. A year after the League of Stars and Mist Bodhisattva tribe established diplomatic relations. Seven Lights University. The academies at Sector B had regained their peace. The teachers who left had returned one after another, and most of the students had returned as well. Everything was gradually returning to normal. The students of Seven Lights returned very quickly, and there were a lot of new recruits this time. Following the establishment of diplomatic relations between the League of Stars and Mist Bodhisattva tribe, Seven Lights became the first pilot school of the Academy Exchange program. Everyone wanted to fight for the exchange spots. It was exactly because of this that the higher-ups of Seven Lights were incredibly busy right now. However, there was one executive who was an exception. Mo Hong was about to become Seven Lights' new headmaster. However, Sir Mo was still recuperating and hadn't officially taken office yet. During this time, Sillin had been staying at Mo Hang's place. Although Mo Hong was injected with complete antibodies in time after he was infected with the virus, he was too tired at the time to help the army repair the fighter and space plane. He hadn't recovered yet, and he was old after all. Fatigue and the virus infection had damaged his body. He would definitely be very busy after he took over as headmaster, and neither Sillin nor Mo Ching could rest easy until he was well. Mo Hong had just received a new project, and Sillin had taken advantage of this gap to help him start the project. When the time came, it would be easier for Mo Hong to guide him. This project was jointly built by Mo Hong and Guan Feng. As their student, Sillin had to help them, shouldn't he? This morning, Sillin had worked for 2 consecutive nights at the lab and returned to Mo Heng's villa at Seven Lights. Mo Hong was chatting excitedly with 2 people. One of them was Guan Feng. Instructor Guan had been staying here recently to discuss the new project with Mo Hong. Otherwise, the so-called Academy Exchange program would become nothing more than a decoration. The other person was an old teacher of Seven Lights, but he specialized in literature and history. He lived not far from Mo Hong, and they had a pretty good relationship. The old man had come to visit Mo Hong while he was recuperating. Guan Feng's interest was piqued when he learned that the old teacher specialized in literature and history, and he asked him about the history and culture of the League of Stars. Now Instructor Guan had found his soulmate again. The little old man told Guan Feng about the history of the League of Stars and the local customs of the various sectors. He was an old teacher after all, and many of his insights were incomparable to the current young teachers in Seven Lights. The old teacher was able to answer many of Guan Feng's questions, and the 3 of them could even discuss them together. When Sillin returned, the little old man was about to leave. He had a class in the afternoon. Originally, this class wasn't supposed to be taught by a great teacher like him, but the young teacher had something to do at the last minute, so the little old man led the class on his behalf. "Sai, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Come on, we're only halfway through the story. We're not done yet." Mo Hong said, "What do you mean by story?" That was the wrong word to use. However, the little old man was already used to Mo Heng's way of speaking. He lived up to his reputation as an academic ruffian. In fact, the old teacher was in a good mood talking to Mo Hong and Guan Feng. After all, not everyone would be interested in such a boring class. "I think you should stay and continue the story." Mo Hong motioned the little old man to sit back down. "What do you think you can say to those students? They've heard so much about the famous people in the history of the League of Stars, and they're not interested in those who aren't famous. You don't have the courage to talk about secrets either, so even if you go, those kids won't be willing to listen to you. It's just a waste of effort and effort." These words were too direct. The little old man's face flushed a rare shade of red. It was true that there were very few people who liked this class, and the people who chose this class were only doing it to earn credits. I've already agreed to be your substitute teacher. Otherwise, who's going to teach the afternoon class? The little old man was also helpless. Mo Hung and Guanfeng looked at Silin at the same time. Silin, who had just washed his hands and was chewing on an apple, paused. Why are you guys looking at me? Guanfeng raised a finger and pointed at Silin. Let him go. He's an honorary scholar of the Mist Bodhisattva Royal Academy of Sciences, so he's absolutely qualified. Just look at the lousy class atmosphere Mo Hung mentioned just now. You'll be wasting your energy and effort if you go. This was yet another unceremonious remark. Your disciple hasn't slept a wink for 2 days straight. Silin criticized silently. The two teachers were obviously the kind of people who would kick their disciples when they found a soulmate. Silin had fully experienced their shamelessness during this period of time. Therefore, this lousy class that Mo Hung mentioned was taken over by Silin. Silin left Mo Hung's residence, but he didn't head straight to the teaching area. There was still some time before class started, so Silin drove the flying car to a building. This was a newly built building in 7 lights, and Silin built it with his own money. The building looked like a crouching insect, and there was a sign on it, Parasite Password. It was a parasite herbarium, and it was currently the largest and most comprehensive parasite herbarium in the League of Stars. Silin had spent a lot of effort to build it. The herbarium included the parent nightmare tapir, emperor, the bird of paradise, and many other species with stories. The person in charge of this herbarium was a retired soldier. The people of 7 Lights did not know his background, but since Silin and Mo Hung had decided to let this person take charge, no one else said anything. Seeing Silin's arrival, the person greeted Silin. Someone's here. Silin was puzzled. This herbarium had just been built, and it wasn't open to the public just yet. Those who could enter were all people that Silin was familiar with, or the gatekeeper wouldn't have let him in. You'll know once you take a look, the gatekeeper said with a smile. He didn't answer who it was. Silin walked in and saw a familiar wheelchair. Godfather did not look at the parent nightmare tapir, nor did he look at the emperor, nor did he look at any of the parasite specimens. He was looking at a copied notebook. It was the parasite code copy written by Communidin that Silin had placed here. The parasite code Silin had placed here was only a partial copy. There were some notes in the notebook that were more sensitive to the current situation, and Silin hadn't placed them here. After the nightmare tapir incident, parasites had become something that many people feared. At the same time, they had also become some people's new favorite. Silin was afraid that these people would create a second nightmare tapir incident based on the notebook's contents, and that would go against Communidin's original intentions. Nada had said that Communidin hoped that more people could understand parasites, and it was not a suggestion to place the parasite code in the herbarium. Right now, Nada was probably the only one who understood Communidin the best. Since Nada had said that, Silin put the notebook in after taking care of the copy. While letting more people understand parasites, they would also know about the existence of a hunter named Communidin and the contributions that this insignificant hunter had made in the field of parasites. At the same time, there was another person's notebook in the literature section of the herbarium. That person's name was Enji. Hearing the footsteps, Godfather did not move his eyes away from the parasite code. He was still reading it. Silin did not disturb him. Godfather had brought 2 new species this time. They were both discovered in space. Silin made a record of the 2 specimens that had just entered the warehouse. Godfather had already placed the information of the 2 new species next to him. All Silin had to do was to log in. If Silin was not there, the person in charge would take care of it. The person who discovered the specimen was also stated on the specimen. He entered the name of the Godfather into the discoverer's field, Shiluo. After walking around the herbarium, Silin drove to the teaching area. He needed to find a classroom. There were not many people in the classroom, so Silin took a nap in the last row. When he woke up, it was almost time for class. Only a third of the class was filled. Since he was bored, Silin took out a tablet and started to flip through the course materials. Every student had these materials, and they could be downloaded from the teaching platform. It was a shared file. While Silin was reading, someone patted his shoulder. It was a student who came to class. Hey, bro, please let me know if the instructors need me. My name is Chung Bai. After saying this, The person lay on the table next to Silen's seat and began to sleep. 2 minutes before class started, a boy ran in from the back door in a hurry. Then, he took out a stack of 7 Lights cards and began to swipe them at the sign-in counter. Swiping cards was one of 7 Lights' policies, but it was a semi-mandatory policy. The instructors of 7 Lights knew about things like signing on behalf of others. They just didn't say much about it. The crux of the matter was whether the student was willing or not. Swiping cards required a 7 Lights card, and there was only one 7 Lights card per person. It could be considered as identification within the school, and one card could be used for all purposes. Students who skipped class without a 7 Lights card had their own way to live and spend money on campus. It was just that there were some places they couldn't go. Seeing Silen looking at him and swiping cards one by one, the person chuckled. He did not look uncomfortable at all. "Bro, are you new here?" The person sat down in front of Silen and turned around to ask. The seat on the other side of Silen was already occupied, and it was also a sleeper. Silen nodded with a smile. "Oh." The person looked as if he understood. After the chaos of the League of Stars, 7 Lights had recruited another batch of people after it had recovered its strength. There were people from every grade. It couldn't be helped. The temptation of being an exchange student was too great, and a large number of people were trying their best to enter 7 Lights. There were new students every day, so everyone was used to it. In fact, there were quite a lot of people who chose this course. It was a relatively loose class, and although it was dull and tedious, everyone was willing to take it and earn credits. Otherwise, if the number of people who chose this course was small, the class venue would not be a large lecture hall. There was no distance learning for this course because it involved certain questions of history and culture. Sometimes, it was not easy to talk about it on the internet, and it would be bad if someone brought it up. Therefore, although there were more people taking this course, the attendance rate was not high. It was because it was dull and boring, and because many people were unwilling to come to the teaching area. When the music started, the front and back doors closed automatically. Those who came in again would be recorded as being late, and the corresponding credits will be deducted after a certain number of times have been accumulated. The moment the doors closed, the students in the classroom became excited, because they did not see the lecturer. While everyone was chattering and discussing, Silen stood up and walked forward from the last row. The students in the classroom were a little curious. After all, even if they did not see the lecturer after class, no one would walk around so quickly. It would be terrible if the lecturer came in and caught them in the act. What made the students' eyes widen even more was that the person who walked forward took out a 7 Lights card used by teachers and swiped it on the teaching equipment. A light screen popped up, and some of the teaching materials that Silen had seen before flashed on the giant teaching screen. After pulling out some of the materials for backup, Silen stood facing the students. "Good day, everyone. The original lecturer for this class is unable to come due to business, so I will be the one to talk for everyone this time." Silen's words were like a bomb that blew up all the students in the classroom, especially Chung Bai, who was sleeping on the table next to Silen and was woken up by someone's slap, and the person who took out a stack of 7 Lights cards to sign in on his behalf. The duo's expressions kept changing, and they looked as if a great disaster was about to befall them. "What content did your previous lecturer talk about? Where should we start?" Silen asked. The little old man had never mentioned this before, and no one knew what he had talked about. He only told Silen to freely express himself. The group of students did not answer. They looked dispirited, and some of them had already laid down and started to sleep again. Some of them were more concerned about Silen's personal information and wanted to inquire about it, but Silen refused to talk about it at all. Seeing no reaction from the crowd, Silen asked again, "Then, what do you want to hear?" As a result, someone immediately became excited. "Let's talk about the Heavenly Edict." "What? You might as well talk about the 6 Stars of Hunter." "None of them." "Little lecturer, tell us about the Mist Bodhisattva Empire." Right. "Little lecturer, tell us about the Mist Bodhisattva Empire." "We're already friends, and we still don't know much about it." TSK, a temporary lecturer, maybe even a senior student. "Do you really expect him to talk about those things?" A student muttered. Half a minute later, Silen raised his hand and pressed down at the air, motioning for everyone to quiet down. "Then let's talk about the Mist Bodhisattva Empire." Sillen turned off the two teaching support screens beside him, leaving only the one behind him. Then, he drew out many analytic diagrams on the screen. The Mist Bodhisattva Empire is a caste system. The nobles rule this empire. And when it comes to the nobles of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, we have to mention the three kings and one monarch who stand at the top of the nobles. As Sillen explained the general situation of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, the students who were minding their own business quieted down and listened attentively to Sillen's explanation. Some of them wanted to send a message to their good friends and ask them to come and listen, but they discovered that they couldn't communicate with the outside world at all. Emohung had turned on the interference device in this place, so those who didn't show up could only miss the opportunity. Moreover, without permission, no one was allowed to record any teaching videos in class. Now the students could only sigh for those who didn't show up. Some of them thought that it didn't matter even if they missed the opportunity. There would always be other lecturers to talk about the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. It wasn't until a while later that they realized what kind of opportunity they had missed, but Sillen had already left by then. At the time, the students didn't think that the lecturer would be the new 6 stars of Hunter, the one who was publicly acknowledged to be the most influential among the 6 stars of Hunter. However, there was just too little information about this new star rank hunter. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere and caught everyone off guard. Even after he appeared, it was strangely difficult to find any information about him, so no one in this group of young students knew who he was. After class was over, Sillen didn't wait for the students to surround him and ask him more about the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Sillen left. On his way back to Mo Heng's place, Sillen received a message from Yudi. Everything had been prepared, and they were just waiting for Sillen's return so that they could set sail again. "I'll be back in 2 days after I'm done here," Sillen said to Yudi on the other end of the call. After the call ended, Sillen thought about how he could finish the project at hand as soon as possible and hand it over to those 2 shameless old men. The 11th squad journey was about to begin again, and everyone in the squad had been waiting for it for a long time. He wasn't going to stay here for long. The flying car flew past the classroom area, leaving behind the people who were still in discussion. Like 1,000 years ago, Olillo, who symbolized dreams, appeared, and the space adventurers began to evolve in a certain direction. Hunters, a class that no one thought highly of before, rose to prominence. 1,000 years later, the shortcut was opened, and another peak of the Hunter era had arrived. End of book.